meeting of the New York City Audit Committee of February 24, 2016. The first order of business is the roll call, and then the secretary will take care of a few housekeeping matters. Controller.
Michelle Mark Levine for Controller Scott Stringer.
Mr. Spitzer.
Michael Spitzer, private member.
Mark Kaplan.
Bernard Rosen.
Bud Larson, private member.
Mayor's office.
John Grathwell.
Nicole Fleming.
We have a quorum. Okay, Madam Secretary.
Good morning, everyone. As the first meeting of the Audit Committee's new year, we'd like to now open the floor to receive nominations for chair.
I move Bernie Rosen as chair.
I second.
If all in favor,
Aye.
Bernie Rosen is the chair of the Audit Committee.
By claim.
We need a nomination for secretary.
I make a motion.
I nominate Jackie.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The next order of business is to adopt the Audit Committee bylaws in accordance with Article 4, Section 3.
You know, I looked at those things, Bernie, and I don't know if you
When
want.
they're in there, you...
I know, but they could use a tune-up, but we will deal with it later, okay? If I think you don't want to do it.
So have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And now the motion to accept the minutes of our previous meeting of January 20th. Have a motion?
I actually have a quick comment on,
Have some changes too.
on page 3.
Why don't you do this, Mr. Nicole? We'll give it to the secretary,
Okay.
okay?
Me too.
There are a few. Hearing no objections, I'm going to assume that they're acceptable. The next motion is to accept, being it's the first meeting of the year of the Audit Committee, our annual report, and any edits or changes could be submitted to our secretary. And finally, we can move on to the regular order of business, the financial statements and management letter of the New York City Water and Sewer System.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee members. My name is Robert Balducci. I am the controller for the New York City Water Finance Authority. To my left is the auditor, Mike Malloy, the engagement partner from Deloitte, who did the audit. To my right, we have Tom Porcelli, who is the executive director of the Water Finance Authority. Next to him, Steve Lawritz, who is the deputy commissioner of DEP. We have Matthieu McLean, who is the executive director of the Water Board. And next to Matthieu is Namika Sharma. If you may recall, Valerie Mahalo was the assistant controller, and she retired, and Namika has done a really great job in taking over her place. With that, I'm going to just turn it over to this is going to be a group effort, so first up is Tom.
Great, thanks. Good morning. I was going to just run through some highlights from the water and sewer system financials. Water and sewer revenues increased $110.5 million, or about 3%, primarily as a result of a rate increase in 2015 of 3.35%. Non-operating revenues decreased $121.9 million, primarily because of a one-time $83 million settlement received in 2014, a decrease in fiscal year 2015 of $27 million of investment income due to the maturity of an investment, an interest rate exchange agreement, and a decrease of $10 million in subsidy income. On the expense side, operation and maintenance expenses decreased by about $51 million, or 3.4%, primarily due to a decrease in the citywide fringe benefit rate from 51% in fiscal year 14 to 48% in fiscal year 2015. On the balance sheet, the Water Finance Authority issued $2.9 billion in bonds, excluding bond anticipation notes, of which $2 billion was used for refunding, for savings. We had gross savings in excess of $500 million on these refundings. The authority also legally defeased approximately $739 million of outstanding bonds using revenues. During fiscal 15, the authority issued $800 million of commercial paper notes to pay the cost of improvements to the system. EFC granted a principal forgiveness of $217 million on a 2010 bond anticipation note that was provided under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009.
Have any other bans outstanding, or that was the only one?
We have other bans outstanding with EFC that will ultimately be refinanced.
And the bans are also from the American Recovery?
No, this was the only one.
You try to take them out annually, or you leave?
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay.
Yep. The authority transferred approximately $1.4 billion to the city for construction costs. Additionally, the Cattell UV disinfection facility and the Croton filtration plant were placed into service in fiscal 15. As a result, the $1.4 billion was moved from construction work in progress into depreciable assets. Restricted cash, cash equivalents, and investments at the end of fiscal 15 were $2.3 billion. Total capital assets net of depreciation increased by $271 million. This is the net result of the $1.3 billion addition to construction work in progress and the recognition of $1 billion of depreciation expense. In fiscal 15, there was an increase in net position of $288.6 million. This reduced the negative net position in fiscal 2014 to a positive, 130 approximately million as of June 30th, 2015. As we've discussed here in previous years, the primary driver of negative net assets is due to the payment of non-capital assets with bond proceeds. The system also does not provide for funding of depreciation. The cumulative amount of non-capital assets for financial reporting purposes, which were paid for with bond proceeds, was approximately $1.4 billion net of bond principal payments. Finally, the authority adopted GASB Statement Number 72, dealing with the fair value measurement and application of our investments. We did this early. This resulted in additional disclosure on how the fair value of investments are measured, and that's provided in the financial statements in notes 2 and 4. With that, I want to turn it over to Steve for an update on the system.
Yeah. I went through over the weekend, I don't remember exactly. What do you do the hedging for? What do you use the hedging?
That one hedge that we have in place was...
You only have one now?
We have two that were done at exactly the same time. They're essentially the same transaction with two different counterparties. They were done to basically lock in a lower fixed rate at the time when we did it. So we sit, normally we would have issued fixed rate debt. We did a synthetic fixed rate transaction, and that has resulted in savings relative to fixed rate we would have entered into at the time.
In spite of the cost of the hedge? In spite of the cost of the hedge, there was
right. Yes, when we look at the all-in sort of cost of the transaction, we still have achieved savings over fixed rate debt that we would have sold in its place at the time, back in 2007.
Like the hedge. I can't understand it. All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members, and I will just briefly summarize some of the highlights of the system from the past year. As Tom mentioned, we placed the Croton water filter.
Move the mic over to you, if it's possible. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
That one? Stereo. We placed the Croton water filtration plant in service in May of 2015. When it was awarded for construction in 2007, it was at the time the largest single construction contract that the city had ever awarded. The plant has a capacity to filter 290 million gallons of water a day, which would represent about 30% of New York City's daily water consumption. We've tested the plant at that maximum level of $290 million, and so we um, achieved a milestone in the consent order under which the plant was built. And we've been running the plant regularly at about 80 million gallons a day, about 8% of New York City's consumption. The big benefit of the plant will come a few years down the road when we have to shut off the Delaware Aqueduct for a period of time to connect it to a bypass tunnel that we're currently constructing, which I'm going to mention next. As part of our currently largest single program, Water for the Future, which is to fix the leak that has existed in the Delaware Aqueduct, which supplies half of New York City's water, a leak that we've known about since the 1990s. We are nearly...
Shut it down, otherwise we won't have water. Right?
That's right. And so we have an entire program called Water for the Future. We have a contract, BT1, which is constructing 2 vertical shafts, one on each side of the Hudson River. That project is nearly complete, and we've awarded contract BT2, which is a $700 million contract to construct a 2.5-mile bypass tunnel under the Hudson River to bypass the leaking section of the Delaware Aqueduct. So that contract has begun and is just waiting for the shaft contract to vacate the site to actually begin construction. Another component of Water for the Future is, again, a project that has been completed and we're going through testing now. It is the Shaft 4 interconnection, and it's a connection between the Catskill and Delaware aqueducts, which will allow us to put Delaware water into the Catskill aqueduct, which will provide us alternative capacity when the Delaware aqueduct is shut down in approximately 2022 to connect the bypass tunnel to the existing Delaware aqueduct on each side of the Hudson River. I just also want to make the committee aware that we continue to reap benefits from our $250 million investment in automated meter reading. We are currently about $110 million, which is about 4% ahead of our revenue collection plan for this year. And the system has been responsible for a 50% reduction in the number of customers challenging their bills because now our customers can see what we see. We've introduced a number of tools for them to look at their actual near real-time water consumption at home, or actually we have an app that lets them view their water consumption from anywhere they want. And finally, we are near the end of a 4-year contract with Veolia Water for our Operational Excellence Program, which we call OPEX. Under that program, we've achieved a recurring annual $98 million benefit to our operations and maintenance, split almost 50-50 between expense reductions and additional revenue generated by a targeted, aggressive, large meter replacement program.
How are you on the third water tunnel?
So,
you're not fully operational. You had it almost.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, the Manhattan section in Lower Manhattan was opened in October of 2013, about 2.5 years ago. We have the Brooklyn-Queens segment of the tunnel. The tunnel itself is complete. We need to construct 2 vertical shafts, shafts 17B and 18B in Queens. And
whereabouts in Queens would that be?
In the
If you don't, it's, no, I,
Maspeth area, yeah.
they'll love you for it.
Trying to think between Maspeth and Elmhurst and
Real residential area. Go ahead.
right. So we need to construct those 2 shafts. We need to have a tunnel startup contract, and as we did with the segment in Manhattan, through the city's Department of Design and Construction, we'll let a number of contracts to connect those shafts to the local distribution systems. We're looking to put all of that, which is approximately $600 million, into our next biennial 10-year capital program update next September, this coming September.
The 2 water tunnels that exist, you have to remediate, don't you?
So
Once Tunnel 3 is working, you'll have to eventually remediate the other 2. You can't do it until the 3rd one is fully operational, I guess.
So, right, and tunnel number 1, which was built in 1917 and has been in continuous operation since.
Go ahead.
And tunnel number 2 was completed in 1936. So, completion of tunnel 3 in Manhattan would allow us to shut down tunnel number 1 and inspect it for the first time in 100 years.
Very good.
But again, we want to, it's working now. We want to have another year or so
Sure,
of
I understand.
operation of Tunnel 3.
It's really amazing, the work that has been done over these many years. I commend you for it. I mean, it's expensive, but without it, I don't know what we would do. And I guess some of the work you've done on the Croton plant, that pollution control has helped us tremendously. I imagine we would have been fined and whatnot if that didn't exist. I think I'm right.
So, right, on the Croton water plant, that's right, there were significant financial penalties under the consent order if we had not met the May milestone for opening the plant. We would have faced, I think, approximately $90 million. I'm sorry, $65 million in penalties, and it was an all or nothing penalty situation. So we achieved the nothing.
Oh, good. That's terrific. Mark, do you have any questions?
I have some, if I may. They're nothing of the
Then
major
I'll
sort.
get to the statements.
One comment I have, just strikes me, it's not yours. 25 pages of the financial statements are devoted to OPEB
Yes.
and pension. And something says to me that as a society, we have our heads on sideways with that kind of an issue.
So
That I'd say not, it's a criticism.
I wanted to even mention that before you started. So, yeah, there is 20 pages. So this, we also, we issue a CAFR. We issue it to, and we have received a certificate of excellence for a number of years. One of the items that you'll see that the financial statements are a little bit bigger than last year is that we did get some comments from the GFOA about our OPEB disclosure. And to put it to perspective is we have 20 some odd pages of both pension and both OPEB with less than $1 million liability on our finances.
I understand that, but the paper cost of it is outrageous.
Yeah, yes.
And you don't, in your system on page 10, you have the pensions, but there's no reference to OPEB because you just don't fund it.
That's correct.
It's almost as if they're required to put in all this pension information that we're required to put in the city CAFR. Is that it? I'm looking at the part.
Yeah, but in the city,
No, well, because they're almost like an independent component unit.
Yeah, so we have our own payroll, so.
No, I
right.
understand.
And that, and our disclosure is extreme, it's similar to it, except that, you know, we are not, you know, we're part of a cost-sharing plan. So there's a lot of, you know,
Yeah.
there's more on the city side because they have different types of plans.
Yeah.
okay,
But you
I
will
would
see
point that out
similarities.
as a piece of foolishness. Then if you look at page 30, you refer to the fact that the adoption of these new GASB things will have an impact on financial statements. Sometimes I've seen material or not material. What is that? Why is the omission of that word significant here? Will they have a simple impact or a material impact?
Which
I
Gatsby?
don't,
First and second one.
well, will have an impact. I don't think we ever say material. I think we would say we have an impact. So we're using, like for GASB 74, that will have an impact.
No, I appreciate that, but a reader who reads these things and sees in other financial statements the descriptor material
Yeah.
is struck by the absence of it here.
Neither of these I wouldn't expect are gonna have a material impact.
Okay, well,
But yeah, and I guess the point here is, can we say, have an impact but not a material impact? I think
well,
that's.
other financial statements we review
Yeah.
by the same firm use that word. So I just wanted
We
to
will take that, yeah.
take a look at it as to whether, because if you read it, it strikes you. Bear with me, Bernie, I have some more
No, it's all right.
comments here. You list your treasury securities as level 2.
Yes,
Treasury securities have big active markets.
yeah.
I'm more accustomed to seeing them as level 1.
I was
You know,
gonna
I
say
think that we might have spent more time on this than on 68, okay, as far as treasury securities. So, the GASB itself, and I have to thank Michelle, because Michelle and I actually met with the city controls of, I met with David Jetta, because we do have similar financial institutions, and we were getting from one financial institution what U.S. Treasury was as a level 1, and another what U.S. Treasury was as a level 2. And the unofficial answer from the GASB was that, since the U.S. Treasuries go to actual auction, right, that by technical definition is a level 2 by the GASB, but they won't officially say that in their literature and say that U.S. Treasuries is level 2. So I think that we went in, after lengthy discussions between, our financial students, the city, and with GASB, we took, that
So we're
position.
going to be consistently describing that throughout the,
And we do in our CAFR as well.
I just didn't remember, because I just looked at a public company and they're level 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are slightly different standards between the GASB and the FASB guidance.
Okay.
I'm not sure if this is a result of that or not.
I've raised this in the past, Michelle, looking at you as a controller's representative, they're basically a public utility. Shouldn't we start the balance sheet with the,
You
Fixed
have raised
assets.
that in the past, Bernie.
yeah, I mean-
We actually did some research into it. That is not the custom among other public utilities that we found, and it is not.
Con Edison wouldn't do it that way?
I don't know about Con Ed, because they are not GASB reporters, but the
Oh, I see what you
GASB
mean.
guidance
So GASB
does
wants it the
does not put,
old-fashioned
right,
way.
the fixed assets first.
Okay.
I know that the Water Authority did report that way many years ago.
But there's another anomaly here on page 35. The par value agreements to purchase securities interest earned held as cash. I always thought cash was money in the bank, and I didn't think cash was purchase agreements and interest earned as cash.
This is the $34.5 million, is that what you're referring?
Whatever the number is, the description says the par value of government agreements to purchase securities and interest earned are held as cash. Cash is money in the bank. Anything else is short-term
Tax
security.
equivalent.
Depends, well,
Is that the appropriate way to describe them? That's what I'm asking. You can think about it. It's just unusual.
On the same page.
On the forward purchase agreements specifically, on June 30th, we're holding cash, and then that gets reinvested.
Oh, but that's
on the
not what you
first-
say here. You say the par value of agreements to purchase. If you had cash, fine.
Par value of the agreements to purchase securities. So the amount of cash we had is the par value of the agreement on June 30th.
I quit. I just don't understand it, since if everybody else does.
We'll
On the
take a
same
Right.
page, all your investments are subject to custodial risk, except for the GICs.
Right, actually, we've been looking into that a little bit more, and if we actually are trying to interpret
Right, so-
what GASB is looking for, and we, if we have any custodial credit risk, it's very, very minimal,
Yeah, so.
to
yeah,
maybe none.
I guess our understanding of the custodial credit risk, since our investments are not held by us, like the water board's investments, they're held by the water board. They're actually held by the trustee, and our understanding is that if something happens to the trustee, that could possibly expose us, and I think that was, we were in line with the disclosure, but I think that we want to maybe find that definition
We need to-
of agent and counterparty to see if that's so.
We've been doing some research into this, because anytime we buy a security, we don't pay for it until the security has been delivered to the trustee.
Held in the trustee's name or your name.
It's held in the trustee's name.
That's your risk.
Yeah.
But the trustee is not, is separate from the bank. Those monies are held in trust for us or for payment to bondholders. So even in a sort of a bankruptcy of the bank, the monies held in trust would, what we're hearing from the bank, it would not be consolidated in a bankruptcy. So those are
Get
sort
an
of
opinion
walled
from a
off.
bank's lawyer, and then you can say it.
Right, that, we actually.
Get that opinion.
We're actually in the process of talking with them to understand the underpinnings of the trust relationship, even when the when the securities are held in the bank's name.
You know, when we first started looking at this, right, so you had, one trustee was saying one thing, and the other one was saying another thing, and they were contradicting each other. And I think the safest thing was to actually to disclose it this way. I think that we need to really look at this again and try to see if we can get somebody to make
Well,
that
it's
opinion.
not such disclosure. It's to minimize the risk.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, that's
absolutely.
true. That's
And
exactly right.
My understanding, and it's maybe a little, because I don't do this kind of work, but I heard it at the firm, I think that it varies from state to state as well.
Right.
So you have to know where you.
Yeah, we're actually we're talking with our trustee right now to understand, what would happen in the extreme circumstance of it's actually Bank of New York is our trustee right now. So in an extreme circumstance of a bankruptcy, we want to understand how this trust relationship works under the law.
The rate increase was much less, I think, than in the past.
So, yes, Mr. Chair, we've had 5 consecutive years of declining rate increases. The rate increase adopted for this past July 1st was 2.97%. And Tom had mentioned for the previous year was 3.35%.
Yeah.
And we'll
I
be...
can remember much higher numbers.
Yes.
But I guess that was because of the construction costs.
That's right.
okay.
That's right, because most of our expensive mandates had peaked in the 2007 through
Very good.
2010 period. And although we're not going to propose our next year's rate for another month,
No.
that we're very confident that that downward trend is continuing.
I got some bits and pieces I'll give you, but one thing I asked, I didn't understand on page 39, how, this is in a summary of expenses, and the brackets around $4 million. How does it happen that pollution remediation produces money for you?
Yeah. So, you're right. What happened is in fiscal year 14, we had gotten information about the pollution remediation, and what we found out after we issued the financial statements, it wasn't correct. So
So
we
this
had
is
to bring
correct
down.
on prior year's error.
Yeah, so we had to adjust this. Yeah, it was a change, right, it was a change. So we worked that out actually with the auditors, and it was a change of the.
It's not material, but it's an oddity.
Yeah, it's an oddity, yes, you're right. You're not gonna see a, a
And
positive
the only thing I
expense.
say is if this was read by anybody trying to figure it out, there's no explanation for that oddity. Now, maybe you don't care.
Yeah,
Where I come from, you'd have to explain it.
We touched on bands before. You're allowed to have bands with a greater maturity than a year?
Yes. Yes, and our bans have been issued directly to the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation.
Because of that,
No, I think we can go longer than a year on bans.
Okay, let me take you to page 42. After all the bullets on the page, there's a statement about you defeased so much and the loss of $59 million. Elsewhere, you refer to the fact that it's an economic gain from all these transactions. That's the only one that doesn't refer to an economic gain. Is there a reason for that?
Do you know
The same thing's true on the next page. you look at the last paragraph on
Well,
42.
this is just using
And the
the
second
current
paragraph on 43, that language is missing. Is there a reason?
I guess we'll have to look into.
Yeah, so, okay, so,
Less than Mika.
starting with during fiscal year 2015?
Right.
Yeah, so what we're talking about in all the bullet points above that is the refundings and what happened with the refundings.
Right.
So we also required to disclose when we use our cash, how much we actually, the fees, and what was the result of it. The requirement, I guess, for the refundings, we just following the standard language. We're not required to actually disclose here the economic benefit or
Well,
the,
It was a huge economic
You
benefit.
run through a whole bunch of events, and you say it was a positive for us because it was an economic gain. You
Right.
then get into two different things which smell the same and look the same, and you don't tell the reader that
Yeah.
they were a benefit. I think you should say that.
and we'll do that then in the future. We'll include that. But the difference is that the other ones were just refunding events, and this one was.
Now, I understand the difference, is to,
I'll make a note of that.
Let's see if there's any other questions.
go ahead, Bernie, I'm just looking.
Do any of the other members have any comments?
A lot of this stuff is,
I'll just say quickly,
Yes.
we did mention that there was a lot of discussion about the implementation of 72. I really want to thank Bob, that he was a great help in the implementation, not just in the Water Authority, but in us dealing with the city's transition. So thank you
No,
very much.
thank you, and it was, and actually, I had a lot of questions, and by gathering everyone together, I think we found, what we think are the best answers.
Sure.
I'm not gonna bother with the rest of the stuff, you can figure it out.
Other than education, I guess they're the second biggest issuer of debt. Michelle? The biggest capital
Program,
is education, they're the second, I guess.
yeah, that's my understanding, but I have to say
I
I'm not
haven't looked at
certain.
it in a while.
About 18 to 20% of the capital plan.
much?
About between 18 and 20, I think,
Yeah.
currently.
Just keep it flowing.
I don't know, do the people, the question is,
Is the absence of snowfall going to affect the reservoirs?
So the reservoirs are currently about 3% fuller than normal for this time of year.
You sure it is?
And so, no, it hasn't affected us so far. And we're expecting that we'll be at normal levels when we need to be starting in June.
If you get less snowfall, but you do get rain,
I'm sorry, sir?
Yeah.
you do get less snowfall, but you do get rain,
Yeah.
you're okay.
I
I just know better.
I was just gonna, I guess all the meter reading, or most of the meter reading is automatic now?
About 97%.
Yeah, they can drive through and it's tremendous.
We, not even drive-through, it's sent automatically every 1 to 6 hours by transmitters mounted on 836,000 buildings in the city.
That's even in the single-family residences as well, it's sort of?
Yes, yes. The only buildings that don't have the transmitters on them are buildings owned by what we call the survivalists, people who won't let us in. But our tariff allows us to charge them twice the normal price per gallon. So
Okay,
we get them
okay.
one way or the other.
That's the penalty.
Like-
Very good. And the Housing Authority and the Health and Hospitals Corporation, they have the automatic as well.
So we're in a program with the Housing Authority where we're replacing their meters and their junctions with us. And so where automated meter reading doesn't exist at the Housing Authority, we're making it happen.
Fix the dam.
Yeah, okay, you know, just an incident. I was doing a little work at the MTA after I retired from the city, and I remember they received a bill for 30-some-odd million for water, for some station or something. I mean, in the older days, I guess that could happen. There'd be bills, they'd be thrown away. But I think that's all changed, I'm sure.
It has.
All right, very good, very good. If there are no other questions, I want to thank you. Very, very good job, as always. Yes, sir.
We're gonna go through the management,
Oh, you have a management letter, I'm sorry. Yes,
Not much
yes.
there.
I apologize.
well, I mean, I don't know if there's very much to go through. We have a communication from the auditors about no material deficiencies. If you had a chance to look at that.
But there are no deficiencies, right?
No, there
No
is-
findings, okay.
Here.
If I could just make a comment, that's an incredible accomplishment for a system that had, for many, many years, persistent, serious comments about both their capital asset accounting and their accounts receivable accounting. So this is a tremendous achievement, and I want to congratulate you.
Yeah, and I'll extend those, to DEP, who has helped us with putting some reports together that answer the CIS problems and I just want, one of the reports that we were, that we got was the overlap of the billings to try to come up with an amount that, we can accrue. And we got to, we read as of June 30th, so we know that actual amount of the charges, but, I just have to let you know that our estimates were within 3% of what we did by making our estimates. So it was, we had the actuals, we had the estimates, we were in line. And then also the auditors, to listen to us about our fixed assets, to look for alternative procedures to test it, to show that our construction work in progress, that we had some validity in the way that we was making our assumptions and developing the construction work in progress.
You had to raise it, you left me to raise this, my pet peeve, you know what it is. The last paragraph.
The hardest part of this was I had to go out to Queens, to the DEP office. I had to find parking, which was like,
Where was this, in what area?
Fairfax City.
What?
LaFrac City.
Oh, no, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Someday you guys are gonna change that last paragraph.
Yeah, all right. Thank you all again
Mr.
for
Chair.
everything. Very, very good job. Nice set of statements, too.
Not much. Some of them you can figure out, they're just questions.
Alan, you're on? Okay. What do we do next here? What do you want to do next? Alan, Hudson Yards, you're on, you're on.
You got away easy.
Yeah, I gotta hope.
I look at that,
Are you hearing everything okay?
no, I will.
Push the mic.
I'll go.
I think they should take
It's
the
not as
mics
hell in here,
closer. My hearing could be better.
Am I wrong?
And Michelle.
Jackie, you're trying to get us out in a hurry by turning the heat up.
No.
No.
I would never have such a plan.
I've done that.
Michelle, I'm right about the assets.
What?
I think that the assets, they should do it the way I said it. I really do. Look at what they spent.
Shut down.
Cares about the current assets.
I know, but it's really not the way the standards read or the way it's customary.
Go there, and then when Mark leaves, come around and sit next to me after Hudson.
That was a major, major achievement.
That's always a problem.
They've done great.
It's a big hassle and nobody's there working on it.
And shut it down.
Want to make sure.
Thank you, Don. Thank you.
But create now, unfortunately,
Work zone and no workers.
are going to be on.
When the workers are there.
When I was in the
You might see, you won't take your hat unless you.
Yeah.
And I'll call you back down.
Burning. Bernie.
Good.
Oh my God, Bernie. Bernie,
Either that or
you should probably keep an eye on the clock. We have so much to get through.
Yeah, no. I think the others will move much more quickly. I'll try my best.
All right, great.
Good, okay.
And interrupt anytime you want. I really mean it. If you feel
No, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, this was the biggest substantive.
it was the water.
Yeah.
questions out of the way.
Their receivables were so bad at one time, it was ridiculous.
They made drastic improvements.
But that incident with the MTA, it was over $30 million. I'm sorry, Jackie, I'll let you sit down a minute. I called Mark Page, he says it must be a mistake. The MTA sent them a check. So the guy, I forget his title of the MTA, he's a tough guy. He says, if you send me a check without a letter, I'll go to your office and I'll knock you.
Yeah.
The guy never sent a letter, he never sent a check. Nobody knew what it was for.
No.
How you doing? Nice to see you again today.
Chairman, good to see you.
Pardon me?
Mr. Chairman, good to see you.
Okay.
Who's next?
Hudson Yards.
We need to have Bob back. I think
What?
we need Bob back.
Okay, he's got a little coffee, give him a chance.
There he is.
There he is.
Houses, Bernie. Our firm is one of the major tenants in the development.
Your firm should have bought the building they were in on 3rd Avenue years ago.
1930?
sure.
No.
You should have bought it yourself. You'd be multimillionaires today. Times Square was shit. Who moves to Times Square? All right, let's introduce yourselves and we'll begin.
Let Bob do that.
So I'll introduce it. So we have two entities here. We have HYIC and HYDC. To the left of me, we have Jay Olson, who's the treasurer of HYDC.
I see. I see.
I'm sorry, I see. We have Alan Anders to the right of me, who is the president of HYIC, and we have Mark Spector. He is from EDC, and he's going to be representing HYDC.
He is president of
President.
HYDC.
President HYDC. And we have our auditors, Warren Rupel, which I guess doesn't need very much.
Warren gets it fast.
So with that, I think we're gonna start off.
Sure.
Which one are we doing first?
Well, we thought it would be useful to have sort of an update of current events, and HYDC does all the work, so they go first.
Go ahead, speak
Yeah,
up
I
and speak
disclosed
into
Sure,
our
sure.
firm is the principal tenant in one of the buildings.
If I recall correctly, that was Skadden, right?
That's correct.
In Manhattan West, which is a great project. So excited to see them take that space. Alan's being humble. We are proud of the work that we do, but he and his team also do a lot of great work on Hudson Yards. So like Alan was saying, I thought I would very briefly take a step back, talk a little bit about the Hudson Yards project, talk about where we're at today and what we're seeing happening going forward. So taking a step back, as you probably all know and are well aware, Hudson Yards is a district, broadly speaking, from 30th Street to 42nd Street on the west side, between 8th Avenue and 11th Avenue on the far west side. It was envisioned to be a new mixed-use district and to accommodate growth in commercial development, as the large sites in Times Square and around Grand Central were developed. The thinking and planning was to look west, and the city, of course, in 2005 and 2009, did a number of steps to facilitate that development, including a rezoning, and then most significantly, extending the number 7 subway line from Times Square, where it ended at the time, over to Hudson Yards. That's
working.
And that's working at open, which was the biggest update, I think, from when we last spoke. In September of last year, we opened up the subway. I encourage you all to go there if you haven't had a chance yet.
The city paid for it, right, sir?
City paid for it. It was $2.36 billion. We are now currently working on a second entrance to that same subway line, but just a second entrance a block north of that. In addition to that, which is a really historic milestone for the project, it's been a lot of years of work and a lot of my predecessors and folks that were here before trying to get to that place. In addition, we also opened 3 blocks of park space immediately adjacent to that first entrance, second entrance, and then going north, also using the bond proceeds through HYIC, and that was an important milestone, important day for the community, so there was a lot of celebration on that day in September. Broadly speaking, in terms of where the market's at, $16 billion of private capital has been committed to the Hudson Yards Special District. In terms of commercial development, 12 million square feet is under construction. There's another 12 million square feet that's planned. In terms of residential development, 6,400 units of housing have been built already, and of which 1,200 are affordable. Hotel rooms, that's also been another aspect of development. 4,300 hotel rooms have been built in the district. So that's broadly speaking. What I think most people see and is noticeable if you drive over there, all you do is kind of run into cranes and construction trucks, is on Related site that's above the Eastern Rail Yards. That's where Related is constructing 6 towers currently, of which they're anticipating that at least the exterior, so what'll start to feel like a neighborhood, will be completed by 2019. Immediately adjacent to that, the other major construction site, which we were talking about a second ago, is Manhattan West, which Brookfield is developing. That also is under construction. That's where Skadden Arps is going to be taking about 550,000 square feet. So those are the kind of 2 major sites we're anticipating and expecting that. Jump in if you've got a question.
The platform is being built, or it's built, or over the rail yards?
Yeah, so the Related's platform is done. And Manhattan West, that platform I also think should be done this year.
So there's 2 platforms?
Yep, 2 different development sites.
We're on the dirt, as I gather.
What's that?
The building we're going in is on the dirt, not over the platform.
Yeah, they were fortunate to actually have some terra firma to build on. Related, on the other hand, it's all decking. I'm sure that was probably a little bit of comfort for you guys. But both of those sites are probably the biggest sites. They get the most attention. As you look kind of north of those sites, a number of other developers have bought property there. Those include Tishman Speyer has 2 sites. Rock Rose is developing residential and commercial space further north. So the thinking, and what's interesting to see from a policy perspective and a land use perspective, was always that the development would happen around the subway entrance. And that's really, of course, what's first to go. That's where the Related and Brookfield sites are, the ones we're talking about. And then as you go kind of north along the park space and get further away from the subway entrances, that's really the next phase of development. And we're hopeful to see that accelerate now that the subway is actually open and operational. So we're focused on the HYDC side on finishing that second entrance to the subway, as well as working with development partners on a way to expand the next phase of the park space, so to build more park space in addition to the 3 blocks that have been built. And then also partnering and selling air rights or development rights to developers, which we're allowed to do under zoning and as a part of our deal with HYIC. So we're excited about what's happening there. It was a long kind of milestone in the making. And I think it'll be really interesting to watch this neighborhood emerge around that public infrastructure. Happy to answer other questions.
I guess considering what was on that site before, that's terrific. It was supposedly just garages, auto repair shops, and whatnot. So I guess it was the last
frontier.
The last area that was kind of available in Midtown Manhattan. And it was amazing how much has been done. And the subway, if you bear with me, the entrance that's opened is where? On what street?
Sure, the entrance is open between 30...
No, the first one, the one that's open. Go ahead.
Yep, between 33rd and 34th Street.
And the second one?
34th and 35th.
So you'll have two almost adjacent, is that it?
Yep.
To accommodate all the ultimate traffic we're going to have. It's really one station with 2 entrances.
Once the buildings are built and that.
Exactly.
I remember they had scale models when I was at the MTA when Related. So who pays for the platform? Related.
Yep.
They pay. It's got to be a solid platform, as my colleague said.
Well, I don't care. We're not on it.
I think they're...
I had nothing to do with it. The real estate guys at the firm told everybody, don't worry.
Yeah, they lay up those trains from Penn Station, I guess, right?
Yeah.
That's the ones.
So,
it could be Amtrak, it could be Long Island, it could be Jersey Transit. Okay.
And they were. I mean, they liked Related in particular likes to tell the story. They accounted for the future Gateway project, which is getting a lot of attention, which are 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River. So Related in their deck which cost them approximately $1 billion.
Built those tunnels years ago. Go ahead. We
Yeah,
wouldn't have
putting
so
that
many
aside,
trucks
I'm
on
not
the
going to
street.
wade into that. But they've built the capacity for that, and actually did the work, engineering work, to build around where those trains will go. So they had some good foresight.
All right, so let's turn quickly to the statements.
Yeah, maybe I could, just a couple
Wanna
words.
go through
While
the statement?
HYDC has been focusing on finishing the construction and the second entrance and the rest of the park, HYIC has been focusing on the transition to full self-supporting nature of this. We originally projected that we would have a crossover point somewhere around 2025, 2026, when the coverage was sufficient, 2 years of coverage of an amortization of the debt, that we could just rely on principally the commercial payments in the, of the high-rise buildings. In the meantime, for each of the sites where towers were going up, there was provided that the developers could apply for additional height capacity by making payments to HYIC of district improvement bonuses or transferable development rights, and that would happen at the beginning of the 4 or 5 year construction of a tower, and at the end of the 4 or 5 year construction, the pilot payments, which are the permanent ongoing payments, would begin. So the long and short of it is we got a good wave during this audit year of several $100 million of the payments to get the additional height.
Saw that.
That permitted us to be able to provide that there are no interest support payments from the city in fiscal 16 and 17. Beyond that, there will be, because we have to start amortizing debt once the debt's called. But that's really ahead of time, and a big objective, and very important objective. And during this period that you're looking at, we had the first period where we actually recorded pilot payments, the first $4 million of which is going to become hundreds of $1 millions of
That'll
pilot
be
payments.
coming due, sure.
Right.
I love the government-style statements for, and I'm an old-fashioned accountant. I do. I hate the other ones. And really, they're very informative. So when you talked about the height, that's the bonus revenue that you're...
District improvement
Yeah, those-
bonuses, and there's also a transferable development right also, that's off the ERY.
Now, one thing, if I may, that's mysterious to me. On page 18, you talk about bond premiums reported as a component of bonds payable. My understanding is you sell a bond at 105, that in effect reduces the interest cost over time because you get that premium. I understand that, but why would you, bonds payable, take the premium into account when you never owe that money?
But I think it's a reconciliation.
No, but it says here,
Yeah.
bond premiums are reported as components of bonds payable.
This is a topic of discussion between the city and also Hudson Yards and Gatsby. And so that's why I was looking at Michelle.
Well, in the world I live in, bond premiums are not something which turns into bonds payable.
That's right.
Yeah,
It,
right there.
it used to be, right, it used to be something that was displayed almost like an asset.
Yeah.
But it's just reported differently. It's the same debit, if you will.
Wait, Michelle, if you look on page 21, it says the statement of activity premiums are recognized as an offset of interest expense. That's what I like.
They're recognized as that is exactly what's happening. There has to be a balance sheet amount that gets amortized gradually into the expense. In the past, that was reported as an asset.
No, but it's an offset of interest expense.
It's right.
But if you go back, forgive me again, back to page 18, a component of bonds payable.
Yeah, so.
So you're taking 105 and amortizing it when
Give
you never
Bob a
owe 5.
chance.
So actually.
If you've got an answer, don't bother.
No, but the financial statements before actually separated our bond premium discount on our financial statements.
I thought so.
So we actually, following a GFOA comment consistently that actually I believe went to the city, went to water, okay? And the GASB says that they are supposed to, bond premium and discount are supposed to adjust your liability. So you have to add or subtract the discount and report it as one. Very hard to track on the financial statements, you know, we have a table at the end, but, you know, it's all buried in there now, and we're just, we are trying to comply with, you know, with the comment that we got.
This is also taking and showing it as a reconciliation from the fund to the entity-wide statements. That's what the purpose of this is to
I
show
understand
it.
the purpose, but if you read it, well, let's not
Yeah.
quit. I come from a different discipline, I'm not.
Just very quickly, on page 19 on the Infrastructure Corporation, you show on the Capital Projects Fund, the subway extension of 107 million. That the city will not pay for. You're paying for it. The station or the city is paying for that.
Yes, that's no, this is the bond proceeds.
You're issuing your own bonds for that other station.
He issued, yes, 5 years ago, and then
Okay.
before that, yes.
I'm amused that on page 30, you're missing $1 million. You talk about installments of $100 million and 3 annual payments of $33 million. So where I come from, you're missing $1 million, just for fun.
It was an initial.
Where at, I'm sorry?
And
It's 5, the first
Go ahead.
paragraph, the end.
What page?
33 down here.
Page 30.
Boom foot.
Oh, so it's probably .33.
Yeah, it was .33.
Forgive me, I used
Yes,
that.
yes. It was 3, yes.
just very quickly, how do tax equivalency payments different from pilot payments?
Pilot payments are for commercial projects, and tax equivalency payments are for everything else. So the hotel.
Oh, okay, thank you for the clarification. And who determines that you have to, specify one, I mean, why can't they all be pilot payments? I guess that's,
No, that the discounted payments by the commercial developers, it was all part of the uniform.
Tax equivalency. Uniform Tax Equivalency Policy, UTEP.
Right, and there's no discount on the tax equivalent,
Gotcha.
the TEP payments.
okay. In other words, if he gets a waiver on the pilots, it'll be the guy who's building the building. Okay, I got you.
Yep.
All right, it works. It works.
It's money.
No, no, they're very well done. So this is going to go on for a long time, this construction.
Well, I don't know if we have a percent, 90-some percent. It's, again, it's the second entrance and the rest of the boulevard.
Yeah, no.
I think you'll probably feel like a lot has been completed by 2019 when
Yes.
Related finishes their 6 buildings that are under construction now.
Yeah. And we move in. with-
Michelle, you had a...
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the transfer development rights sale. One of the questions that I had years ago when I was over there was the actual market value of those, since we were carrying them, at the reimbursement. Just curious what kind of coverage you actually got, what they sold for versus what needed to be collected by the Infrastructure Corporation. Because the Infrastructure Corporation had the first draw before it went to MTA, if I remember correctly.
Right, and plus interest, and we haven't exhausted that yet, so we're still,
I'm just curious
I
for
don't know
the
the use of the term coverage, but
for the transferable development rights that sold, how much more than their proportionate share of the TDR asset that we were carrying, that HYIC was carrying, did they sell for?
Is here.
is.
What?
How much did the
How much
transferable development rights?
Remains to be sold before the
No.
MTA?
How much of what was sold,
Right.
the market value for which it sold, how did that relate to the carrying value that was on HYIC's financial statements?
I don't think it has a relationship at all, so,
Yeah.
I guess the TDRs are set by the right.
There's a lot.
So we sell it based on,
There's
okay.
a sale of
Nobody's
TDR
fault.
policy
That's the way
that
it
sets
goes.
a value for the TDRs to be sold. And that's approved by, I believe, the Hudson Yards Infrastructure Board,
Based on
Right.
square footage.
based on square footage and a market study. And
Comparable
So it's set for
values.
the whole, all the TDRs are at the same rate?
No, so the way it works is, the way it works is there's a policy that HYIC sets about how the process is going to work, and HYDC administers that.
Yes.
The value of the air rights, that's done by appraisal. And so I think perhaps what you may be driving at is the value for what we've sold already. How does that compare against what HYIC thought it was worth?
What they were carrying on their balance sheet as the asset value, correct? That's the question.
And the two are a little,
is what we paid the MTA.
I understand.
the two are somewhat.
I'll take this question offline. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you, you're missing an ad.
All right, if there are no other questions, we do, and there's really no findings in any of the management letters, just that
There were two comments from the prior year that were
the
resolved.
prior years that were taken care of?
Yes.
Okay.
For HYDC.
Okay, so we should move on. We have a very long agenda, good people.
You want these
Yes, I do.
typos?
Alan, what do you
I'll
want
get
to
them at the
do?
end, we got more.
Alan, what do you want to do next, the
I think
TFA?
our TFA was next, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Want to do the TFA?
Yes, is that agreeable?
And,
No.
I don't know, I think,
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
No, he could, okay.
Yeah.
Jay, you'll stay for the TFA?
I'm sorry?
You're at the TFA too?
I'm afraid so.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
He's the presenter of
I
Yeah, he's the
remember.
presenter, so
And,
they start.
So,
introductions first.
Yes,
yes,
sure.
of course.
go ahead.
So I am the controller of the Transitional Finance Authority, and
You must have a lot of chairs.
yeah, I do.
Go
And
ahead.
I
I'm
want to
teasing
make a hat for each one of them. I got the number 7 hat, so I can do the other ones. So on my far left, we have Glenn Fridge, who's the partner, engagement
We
partner
know
for
Glenn,
Deloitte.
yes.
Jay Olson, who is the treasurer of TFA, and to my right, Alan Anders, who is the president of
Executive director.
Executive director. Okay, I'm sorry, just so many different companies, different things. Authorities, executive director, and the other ones are president.
Great. So I know a lot of familiar faces, and we've
You
had,
don't have a mic, move it over, please,
Okay.
if you don't mind. No, no,
certainly. Oh, God.
thank you.
Yes. So a lot of familiar faces here. Hopefully this is familiar but never boring. The Transitional Finance Authority was created back in '97 to give the city incremental debt incurring power over and above the constitutional limit, and since then it's evolved to be a more regular financing vehicle for the city, and it's rated better than the city general obligation credit, which is nice. So it finances the same universe of projects as does GEO for the city capital program. So in 2015, this TFA issued $2.9 billion of new money, future tax secured bonds for capital purposes, and there was also refinancing of a little under $800 million, which generated $100 million of plan year savings for the city. We also issued $1.5 billion of building aid revenue bonds in fiscal 15, and that's to finance specifically the education portion of the capital program.
What do you have, you have a taxable rate on those bonds?
No, the building aid revenue bonds are also tax exempt because it's for education purposes, which are pretty unambiguously for, tax, eligible for tax
The reason I asked
exemption.
it, I think when the Build America bonds
Oh,
first came out, you were
different
able
things.
the feds would reimburse the difference from the taxable rate to the municipal rate, let's say.
Right. The
This is
acronyms are
different.
very similar, BABs versus BARBs, and there are BAB-BARBs, which further complicate things, I suspect. But there are Build America bonds issued through both the future tax secured and the building aid revenue bonds, but both are primarily tax exempt.
Okay.
I mean, there are taxable
Okay.
TFA, future tax secured, but that depends on the nature of the asset being financed. So back into 2015, did you have something else?
No, no. go
Oh,
ahead.
in 2015, $4.1 billion of capital proceeds were distributed back to the city to finance city infrastructure from future tax-secured proceeds. And for the building aid revenue bonds, $1.7 billion back to the city to finance school facilities. The TFA received grants of $2.3 billion in 15. 1.7 of it was from the city in context of its usual surplus role, and around $630 million from the Sales Tax Asset Receivable Corp., which I know Alan will talk about when we get to that audit. So
Moving to revenues and expenditures for the income tax, the TFA collected nearly $11 billion, which is up a bit from the prior year, and the TFA retained a little over $500 million of income tax and building aid revenue to fund debt service in the subsequent year.
So the state, which collects the personal income tax, remits it directly
to TFA.
To the TFA.
Before it gets to the city.
And then the
Yes.
TFA.
So
So it makes for a very good credit.
Exactly. I mean, it sort of fit under all that
No, I got
asset-backed
you.
securitization framework from the rating agencies, and that allowed a better credit rating.
Sure.
So I think I will stop there and then, I guess open it up to questions unless there are any other comments.
You once told me, Alan, how does the city issue its debt? Such a percentage for water, such a percentage for general obligations, such a percentage for TFA. I thought it was very nice if there's still such a formula.
Well, the water is whatever the water proportion of the capital program and then the bonds to finance the capital program are, and that would be somewhere around 20 to 25%. The other 75% is what way to think of it is divided 50-50 between the GO and TFA.
Okay.
Except there's often more refunding potential on the GO,
All right.
and so we'll issue more new money with the TFA, so we keep the amounts of issuance about the same.
And as I recall, in terms of the debt incurring power, they now have to include part of the outstanding debt of the TFA.
Yeah, the formula is for the future tax secured, it's $13.5 billion over and above the constitutional debt limit, and amounts beyond that amount are scored against the constitutional debt limit. So when we look at the city's overall debt incurring power, you get $13.5 billion of credit for TFA, and then beyond that, it's scored against the limit.
Into the debt limit.
And the building aid revenue bonds are slightly different. That's $9.4 billion outstanding, but that's outside the constitutional debt limit.
And when 9/11 hit, I think the state
The recovery bonds.
gave the TFA additional debt incurring power just to
Yep.
clean up.
$2.5 billion of
Two and a half or something.
$2.5 billion of debt incurring power to fund specifically recovery costs
I wish they
related
would
to
just-
September 11, and there's still some debt left over, but that's
Sure.
slowly rolling off and should be done by 2022.
It's a great credit.
Well, better than the U.S. government, according to the rating
Pardon me,
agencies.
sir?
Better than the U.S. government, according to the rating agencies. Hopefully a little less political
Oh, it's
dysfunction
true,
here.
yeah. They line up to buy it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I looked at, well, I have a couple of questions. You refer to the fact
Jackie,
that
we
one
gotta
duly
move it,
authorized
Jackie.
officer can do certain things
Well-
here.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
On page 22, you refer to the fact that somebody as a duly authorized officer, it's a singular officer for what smells to me like a lot of money.
These I can get through
What kind
fast.
of control do you have that one person can do it instead of two? For this thing that just happened?
So I guess so these are the definitions of our non-spendable, restricted, unrestricted.
No, I understand that, but normally when you get over a certain number, you have two signatures. In this case, it sounds like you need one.
Yeah, I think we have, so in our controls, we really just, I guess this is a description of those, elements of the financial statements. But we have controls of any spend. We don't spend anything other than paying for the debt service, which is the monies are really released by the trustee. The operating costs are approved by one person, signed by two different individuals. So we have
You
plenty
have
of.
the controls.
We have all the controls, yes.
It just
So
doesn't
this is just a description of just trying to say what is an assigned or committed.
I made this point earlier. One thing struck me on page 30 is that you sold fixed-rate bonds that were tax exempt at 1%, and at the same time, you were able to sell taxable bonds at 0.6%. That's interesting that you can...
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it varies between maturities and where things, end up falling for a given year, because sometimes we'll be issuing taxable up front and then tax exempt on the back. And if we're talking about outstanding bonds, this is a function of everything that's been issued I think, since the beginning of time.
Yeah, so.
And outstanding,
Right.
so.
So it's a function when it happened, okay.
And to eliminate the 30 pages of describing each one of these bonds, we went to the one sentence.
I understand. I made this comment on the earlier, on 31. You talk about the economic benefits in the second paragraph, but in the third paragraph, you have an accounting loss and no economic benefit. Why is that different from the second paragraph and the fourth paragraph?
No. Defeasance when the escrow
Just an
yield
over-
is
So
lower than the bond
this is
yield.
again a defeasance, and I think you do make a good point. I think we.
I don't want to beat this.
I think we're going to, actually, we'll talk about that in
out.
the future, both for the water and for this.
I'm just going to say, on page 32, I think it's a very important statement about the, the coverage on the bombs, on the barbs, and that you can never have any access to the income tax. It has to be the state appropriations. So I think that's an important qualification.
It's really viewed as state debt. It's
I'm
really-
sorry,
It's
sir?
really viewed as state debt rather than city debt.
Yeah, they have to but I mean, they're appropriating it, right? The debt service payments are being met.
No access to the PIT.
I'm sorry, sir?
No, as you said, no access to the PIT.
Yeah, they'd have to. Otherwise, who's going to pay the debt to the city? It'd be ridiculous, yeah.
Does this group have an audit committee of its own?
Yes.
That's interesting. I never asked that.
That's good. Is it an independent committee, or is it made up of all employees?
No, it's in the, Carol, are you the chairperson of the?
I don't remember which one, but it's board members. So, and all the board members are ex officio.
And she's
So
from the
they don't
controllers.
have any truly-
Yeah, they have,
Haven't
they
had
have.
like
yeah.
No. Everyone represents the controller, the finance commissioner, the director of O&B.
City
Years ago,
council
when I was
speaker.
chairman of this group, I tried to push that idea in every entity to have at least one or two independent people on each audit committee. No, I'm undertaking one, but the Board of Ed had one. Well, and then a number of others do. I just think someday it'll be recognized as important practice. Because presumably those people will have a familiarity with your operation that we can't, come in once a year.
Okay, I guess we should keep moving. The next is the Sales Tax Asset Receivable Corporation.
Yes.
Alan, that's,
At Star, I think, and we had a discussion of this a year ago about the refinancing that we had, but if you remember, Star was set up in
to
2000
refinance the MAC outstanding debt.
Exactly. And the state provided a big budget relief for 3 or 4 years by eliminating the $500 million left to pay MAC by giving us 30 years of state sales tax to finance the takeout. And then we were able, in the fall of 2014, to do interest rates have come down, and so we did it, looks like a traditional refunding, traditional city refunding, where we actually took the savings in the first couple of years and used the savings, in fact, got the savings by taking some of the proceeds to pay off TFA debt. And other than that, there's not a lot new. We're still collecting the $170 million of state sales tax that LGAC sends us.
But it's not, it would be city sales taxes that they're collecting on our behalf, or
No,
it's?
no, this is.
Okay, thank you for the clarity.
Giving
It's like additional state aid,
is exactly, yes, for 30 years.
but they have to, they'd have to appropriate it annually, or?
But now the state has, that's true, but the state has its own sales tax bonds, and so there's
Okay.
a terrible disincentive, tremendous disincentive, good disincentive for them to appropriate every year.
You use some of the money to pay the TFA because?
Well, we needed to use the money we used the money from the original financing to pay off the MAC debt.
Yeah.
And so when we did a refinancing, rather than take the savings over 30 years, we wanted to take it during the plan years. We took it over, I think, 3 or 4 years. And so we did, in those plan years, we took the excess proceeds we could generate, because interest rates went down, to pay off TFA debt and debt service in those years. In a cooperative financing done jointly with the Controller's Office.
When will all this end?
Say again, I'm sorry.
When will this end?
I think around 2033 is the final maturity.
2050 something?
2034, yes.
What?
2034. We'll be back for a few more years.
Sure you bring it to the same audit committee then. Members over the farm.
That's hard to believe.
Okay.
All right. If there are no questions, we really have a very large agenda. On the TSAS, I was going to ask you, that's the tobacco settlement, can we go to that, or?
Yes, we have two other, I think, issuers to talk about, and they're in abeyance. It's not contemplated that there be, it's conceivable there could be a refinancing as there was with STAR for at least TSAS, not for the fiscal year securitization, 2005 securitization. But right now, they're in abeyance.
You got some money from TSAS, didn't you?
Yeah, this is beyond the audit year. There was a settlement of the disputed payments accounts that the tobacco companies were setting aside because they were challenging enforcement, particularly on Indian reservations.
Okay.
So New York State joined in that settlement. It was $550 million last fall, so it's not in this year. We will see it a year from now when we look at the audit. The city gets 25% of that, which is sent through TSAS. TSAS retains a third, and then the city gets the other 2/3.
Okay.
So when this comes in, presumably around April, the city will get $100 million. TSAS will retain another $33 million.
And you can actually predict what you'll get pretty
Well, we're
close?
talking with the state attorney general. That was part of the settlement, and I think we've got it straight from them. I mean,
Okay.
we're kind of passive here. But the state settlement to do, not ours.
All right, it's a good thing.
Let me ask, make one comment on page 23. You say TSAX investments are not collateralized. The only investments that get collateralized that you get, if you deposit money in a bank, you get it collateralized. The investments are not collateralized.
Correct.
So you've got a statement here that's not quite right
Okay.
at the bottom of the page.
Bottom of page 23.
Collateralized.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
last sentence. This one I bet on.
What page are you on?
Page 23, Ron. The last sentence. No, next.
Not
to last.
collateralized, so I'm sorry, your point on that point
It
is,
says TSAX investments are not collateralized.
right.
But you never collateralize investments. You
It would be
collateralize bank
deposit,
loans.
yeah, I hear you.
So that's a statement that doesn't have any meaning here, or else you're raising
Well,
questions.
you could have, there are requirements for collateralized investments. We have to set aside other investments behind the investments. Why we need to have said that's not the case
I don't
here.
understand, no, forgive me, I understand the idea that you want to get collateralization from the bank to protect against the
Right.
bank's insolvency. But if you buy a bond, you don't collateralize that investment.
Right.
Listen, you guys can play with that.
The fiscal year 2005 Securitization
Right.
Corporation, you had to
Present a
have,
summary of how it worked.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, and I just wanted to just introduce our auditor on this one. It's Saks BFT, and this is Jeff Root, engagement partner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
We had some bonds escrowed to maturity. Interest rates went down, so the value of the securities in the escrow went up. Normally, if we could, we would basically say, okay, we don't need those for the refunding. We'll take them out, and the city could have the money, but there were tax laws precluding that.
They were,
There were tax laws, federal tax
Okay.
laws precluding doing
I
that.
remember now,
So we issued the new debt
yeah.
to pay off the refunded debt,
Debt.
and then took the additional, we took the escrow to pay the debt service on our new debt, which is this debt, so it's fully securitized. And because the value had gone up, we could issue less debt in the new debt than the old debt, and that created a value for the city.
That created some. And when will this, when is this gone?
2020,
What?
2020.
Thank God.
Yeah.
You had the office building in Brooklyn that you were, and now this
J Street.
Yes.
creative financing, I must say, really. All right, okay.
I think the last, if there are questions, we can take, otherwise we have the tobacco lien.
You gotta,
But you did the, isn't that the TSAC? You did
Tax
it.
liens. Not tobacco, tax lien.
What?
Tax lien.
Oh, the tax liens, yes, yes.
okay, I'll give you this, there's a couple of typos.
Yes, Alan, it's a busy morning for you, right?
Which one are we doing now?
The various tax liens.
It's actually a stack equal to
Yeah.
the size of the other.
I asked Mark Page about it recently, and he says it works very well. And this gentleman, you're from the audit firm, right, sir?
This is the tax lien trust?
What?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Joe Kemp from what was Tosky and is now EFPR.
Oh, that's another file.
Your firm is where, from upstate, sir?
Yes. We're down
How's the
through
weather?
Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany.
Okay.
So maybe just two sentences to start
Yeah,
with.
it's working.
We've been doing this since 1996. It's a very effective tax collection.
Yeah.
We had our 21st sale, which is covered here. And what you'll see is roughly $50 million of proceeds for the city and $10 million for the Water Authority. But that doesn't count all of the prepayments, the hundreds of millions of prepayments in the spring before we do the final sale.
You said to me once, when the people who are in arrears realize this is going to happen, they pony up the money.
That's the day you get the extra thick daily news and all those listings in the center of all the names? Yes.
About 2 weeks ago.
So would you like to,
It's far better than in Ren, right?
it's definitely much more cost effective, and then the city is not taking charge of
And
public.
you capitalize these payments almost immediately.
Yes, it's a bit, sort of a year and a half, I think, average life on the securities that we issue. It's a securitization.
And it's fine within the local finance law to capitalize this stuff.
Pursuant to a city council regulation that we're able to do
Okay.
that, so that's pursuant to city council action. So we have a financial statement preparing firm in the form of Mark Spaniff and
Yeah.
Rupel over here.
And he's done, and they're the,
I'm sorry?
go ahead, sir.
And our auditor here, Joe Kem, and I believe you have required communications to
Yes.
deliver?
Yes. Which should be in the package.
I'm sorry.
There should be in the package.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, from our standpoint, we audit 5 different entities. All of the audits resulted in unmodified opinions. All of the audits are also done in accordance with government auditing standards, so the report in the back, the government auditing standards report, no control matters noted, no findings related to compliance with laws, regulations, et cetera, et cetera. The 2015-8 trust was new this year. The 2013 and 12 trusts are done this year, and the residual was rolled into the 1998 trust as well, which also has the brownfields that are in there. From a required communication, there's actually a separate letter for each of the financial statements. They, for the most part, say the same thing because it's very, obviously they're identical types of entities. Mark Spaniff prepares the financial
Yeah,
statements.
there's nobody to do it, I understand.
And so, and then we basically audit it. We go through and vet the assumptions. The biggest assumptions out here really relate to collectability of the tax liens, and there's a fairly robust methodology that's been in place that was established a few years ago and continues to get tweaked from that standpoint. So we simply point out that those are the significant estimates that are in place. The tax liens are the most sensitive disclosures, only due to the magnitude of the financial statements. It is by far the largest number in each of the financial statements. From our standpoint, we had no difficulties. We actually do the entire audit remotely. We don't come here. We have upload into safe sites and do everything there. So we sit back in either Rochester, Buffalo, wherever the team may be and do it there. We had no journal entries. The financial statements that we get are from Marks Paneth, are the financial statements that end up in the report.
Where are the books and records kept of this, in the OMB office or in your office?
Well, the books and records are in a number of different places. There are the servicers.
Yeah.
LePerc serves as an advisor. They do kind of an overall, I'll say, management of it, and the debt is at the trustee. So that's kind of why we do the compilation of the financial statements, because there is no management function to.
These are liens of DOF, of course.
I'm sorry, sir?
These are liens of the Department of Finance, so-
Yeah, they have, okay.
And DEP for the water.
All right. So it works.
Yep, so no journal entries, no disagreements, and like
Wonderful.
I say, we were able to meet the timeline.
A clean opinion
And a clean
very
opinion.
good.
Just mention parenthetically that when.
I'm sorry, Alan?
That when this started, 1996, we didn't have audits.
Yeah.
And Michelle Levine, in one of her earlier incarnations, had worked very hard to, and
Yeah.
Jay Olson, in one of his major roles,
Okay.
played a role in insisting we'd feel much better if we had independent audits, and we do
Yeah.
feel better. So it's now been systemized for a number of years, and seems to be working.
Okay. Do you have any comments, Mark?
I'm just looking, other than the fact that the city isn't capitalized.
We
This is
have,
one of my
we
best.
have yet this? Wait, wait, I have to go in
Here,
the next room.
Bear with me, Bernie, I'm flipping.
Okay.
I noticed that your bank lines are not, your deposits are not collateralized to the excess over the 250. Why?
Correct. I mean, the money really cycles in and out very quickly, and we don't expect large balances. I mean, we do try to sweep money into money funds. I'm assuming you're looking at some of the cash balances. And what ends up happening is just the sheer volume of transactions in and out of the trusts can create cash balances. So if we're talking about checks that have been issued by the trust or checks that are received by the trust, those end up counting as cash until cleared. So just the volume of, the little collections coming in and then the disbursements to the servicers, creates a fair bit of volume.
I understand. The thing that, one of these enterprises referred to the fact that it keeps its deposits in a bank, and I've forgotten whether it's one of yours, of a certain size. And the size that it refers to is a peewee compared to what I see for people who really want to be secured. It talks about capital and assets the number was very small. I assume you watched that carefully.
I'm sorry, though.
Keep the cash.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're with Bank of New York, which is not exactly a fly-by-night operation, and as I did mention,
Your
we
point
do
is
try to
it's a
keep
smaller
things
bank?
flat.
Smaller bank of, not maybe one of yours, by the way, isn't it Bank of New York Mellon now?
Yes, I apologies to
the
Mr.
wrong name.
Mellon.
You got the old name. I say that because I just got hit with it yesterday.
Which one are you looking at? Oh, no,
I don't know, Bernie, they're all the
Okay,
same.
no, they all look the same.
They all look the same, and I'm just running through to be sure that there was not an earlier one where I had some comments. Don't hold me, hold everybody up.
It beats the in-rem program.
It really does. Great improvement. That was starting to be a drag for the city, as you know.
The fact that you can capitalize it is quite a coup.
But it's really, that's just the tail that wags the
No,
dog.
that's so
The
you can
dog
issue
is
the debt. I understand.
The dog itself is the threat.
No,
that's
okay.
being put in.
Yeah, all right. The threat, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to sit through city council, state legislative committee hearings. We'd have pension legislation that we'd have to, and they would come in, people with the in-rem crying, and it was really sad.
Yes.
It was really sad.
Yes.
And the chairman, I'll leave him, I think he's gone now, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, used to make us sit through it because we didn't like the legislation that the council was passing. It was a whole story, part of a long career in government.
I'll give you these, you can play with them.
Don't throw them at him, you'll hurt him.
We'll come around.
Okay. That's it, Alan?
That's it for us, I think.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, you did fine. Thank you, sir, for coming down. Thanks again, Warren, for your work.
Anybody
take a quick break? Just a
think my email earlier
5-minute
about
break.
Michelle.
We've got to finish soon.
So we'll have to get.
Mike, what's the code?
Are we taking a break, sir?
Yeah, small break. What? We want to hear from the Gabriel Rhoda Smith, who did the actuarial audit, but we just have one more little component unit that we should do. The New York City Technology Development Corporation. We'll get them out of the way, and then we can go to the other stuff. Yeah. If I recall, this is a pretty new organization, right?
We're just over 3 years old.
I'm sorry?
Just over 3 years
Oh,
old.
you're 3 years old. I don't, time flies, yeah. Okay. Introduce yourselves quickly. You're here again.
No, this is my last one, and you won't see my face. This is my finale. So I am actually the assistant treasurer on this local development corporation. The auditors was Deloitte, which is Glenn, that's on my left. The acting president is Eileen Clary, and we have the treasurer, Mark Totten, that is here. This is I think it's about 2.5 years in business. The first time we met, we were only half year in operations. Last year was full year operations. This is our second year in operations. Most of the financial data that's here is, there's no capital assets here. This is just really, you have personal services and very, very small amount of
Yeah, no,
personal
it's a
services.
small agency.
And just to give you a refresher of the entity, I'm going to just turn it over to Eileen.
Sure, thank you, Bob. Yes, we are a 501c3 and IT consulting entity. We've been in existence and providing services for just over 3 years. We have a contract with the mayor's office, and we provide services to mayoral agencies. Those agencies are our client. We have approximately 17 employees on staff right now, but we are budgeted to have 20 employees. Our services primarily are to advise agencies on IT questions that they may have. We provide assessments on the health of IT projects that are in progress. We will also look at systems at their request and IT organizations if they're properly set up. We focus primarily also on pre-implementation project planning that can include things such as schedule, staffing, budgets, putting a business case together so that OMB will fund what the endeavor is. Other services that we provide are project and program and vendor management, and also project monitoring. We are often called into agencies when there are new commissioners or new chief information officers. It's a great time for people to reassess their IT. And our work is directed by the Chief Technology Officer of New York City, and that's Minerva Tantoko. A few of our accomplishments in the past year, we were very instrumental in getting the technology that supports ID NYC in place, and that was just over a year ago that went live. We also, for the past about 2.5 years, have been in the background for pre-kindergarten and assisting and coordinating all of the IT resources there to make sure that pre-kindergarten is going smoothly, again, from a technology standpoint. And this past year, we also were instrumental in getting inspection ready at the Department of Buildings up and running. And this is a piece of software, central piece of software that tracks inspections of building sites and allows inspectors to be in the field with handheld technologies, which facilitates, speeds up, and makes that process less error-prone. We are also in the midst of some assessments and advisory work. A couple of these items right now are in the mayor's office for people with disabilities. We are looking at their systems and their process and making recommendations as to how they might improve that. We are also doing an assessment at the Citywide Commission on Human Rights, similarly looking at systems and process. And finally, we are advising the Business Integrity Commission on enhancing some existing systems. So just a flavor of some of the work that we do.
The agencies have to come to you?
The work is, we hear often the work is, we are notified of work through our various contacts, but the work that we actually engage in is directed by the Chief Technology Officer of New York City. And it's also the chair of our board, Minerva Tantoko.
The Chief Technology Officer is not an employee of your agency?
That is correct.
No.
No.
How many members of the board are there?
Is it 7? We can have up to 7, and I'm trying to think if we have a vacancy right now. Up to 7, do you know offhand if we have 7 or 6?
Are those people technologically experienced?
Yes, most of them are. Not everyone, but most of them are.
How do you compete against the private sector for the workforce?
We actually are direct competition to the private sector because we are available to agencies at no cost to the agency.
No, I'm thinking of the fact that when you want to hire somebody.
Oh, we want to. Okay, how do we keep our talent?
Given the market that's out there.
Yep. So that's a great question. We don't appeal to everyone, but we do appeal to people typically from consulting backgrounds who are road warriors, and we ensure that you get home every night. You may have an expedition to Queens, but you get back. Yes. And typically the people we appeal to are employee or candidates where they probably have been in the field a long time. They have made some good money, but they're looking for more work-life balance and being off the road.
No, I understand.
Giving back, right. And typically we're not looking for people right out of college. So we're looking for people with, say, 20-plus years of experience.
And the program revenue is what the agencies paid for their services?
No, so the program revenue is actually a contract that is.
Contract with the mayor's office and.
Oh, I see. That's the source of revenue.
Yep, yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the sole source.
Okay. I think it's an excellent idea.
What?
I applaud the whole.
Oh, thank you. I think the idea is pretty good too, actually. Yes.
Where are you based?
Brooklyn in Metro Tech Center.
Oh, the Metro Tech Center.
Yeah, but most of our resources are at client sites.
Yeah.
Where you
Most of them
typically
are out of
placed on site.
So you're near DeWitt. You're near the
Yes,
DeWitt offices.
yes, and we work closely with them as well.
I see.
Any other questions?
I don't think there's any. All right. Continue the good work.
We will.
This
We
really
appreciate
is-
that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your patience.
I'll find it. Too small. No good.
We got the interesting part.
Okay, I guess the final order of business is the actuarial audit report. And you're going to get him, Jackie? Oh, she's getting him? Good. Thank you, Jackie.
Well, it's also there. Most of it. Somebody did a study.
What?
The sun revolves around the earth.
Well, but their schedule was pretty inflexible.
That's interesting.
You know, it was very hard to get them to come in.
Basic scientific stuff is
No, we waited this long to get a date that they could.
They'll be able to handle the PowerPoint, sir? They'll be able to handle the PowerPoint themselves? You have a pointer for them?
If they had come in
You have a device?
November when we asked them.
I know what you mean.
No, they have a device, I guess, all right. Jackie, they have a device to do the,
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I asked the gentleman about it.
I guess my recollection is incorrect. I thought that we had tried for a long time to get them.
Pardon?
Yeah, you don't have to carry it all with you.
Okay.
I did print this and we saw it.
I have one, thank you.
These here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good friends.
Bud,
Answer questions.
what's his name, the guy who's
Good,
in the
good,
lobby? What? I forgot it. So would you be kind enough to introduce yourself, sir?
Yes. Are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready, sure.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Ken Alberts. I'm from Gabriel Roeder Smith and Company. I've got my two colleagues here, Joe Newton and Jim Anderson over there. And we were hired to do the independent actuarial audit for the City of New York. We've got a really big presentation, and I understand we don't have enough time to actually go through it page by page. So we will kind of fly through it initially.
Okay.
And we'll leave time for questions, and then we'll come back, we might come back to some of the other presentation
I
pages as we go
appreciate
through
your
that.
patience. We had just a very long agenda.
That's absolutely fine. So a lot of the stuff we'll be doing is kind of referring to the actual reports.
Yes,
So
no,
these are encapsulations. Just a quick description of the project. There were 2 engagements. This is the second engagement in which we performed an independent actuarial review of the administration, a contribution audit, an experience study, and then the independent actuary statement is a summary of all that product. Next slide. We're going to skip this slide. Next slide. These first couple of slides here are more educational background. As we go through some of the questions, we might come back to these slides a little bit later. Next slide. Got a little bit on market value of assets versus smoothing value of assets. Go 2 more slides. And we might come back to this slide a little bit and talk a little bit about this, but this basically just summarizes the purpose of performing a smoothing process on the market value. Go back one. The red line here is to look at the smooth value of assets compared to the green line, which would be a market value of assets. And so what we're trying to do is get at the overall trend of the market.
John, what do you use for smoothing? The same 6 years that you used to use?
Yes, sir.
You didn't go to 5 years yet, like the whole world does?
So the actuary has not changed the actuarial asset valuation methodology.
All right. Go ahead.
4 years, 20%.
I had to get that thing.
Next slide. So we're reviewing the work for reasonableness, we're reviewing the experience for future assumption setting, and we're putting together a summary of the project.
Excuse me for 1 second. For those
Sure.
of us who read this, if you could also cue in where I'm looking at this rather than this.
Oh, you're looking at the separate reports?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, we will. We haven't gotten to them yet, but we will get to those. Basically, right now, we're just talking about the overview of the project.
Okay.
But I promise to do that. But that does remind me, as you have questions, please interrupt us, as you just did. We would actually appreciate it more if you interrupt us when you have the questions, so you ask questions there, so we make sure that we don't lose any questions, get them answered right up and up front. And you guys can take us in any direction you want. If you want us to go into more depth, more detail, we'll be happy to do that. I mean, we've got 100 pages here. We're here all day, so we can stay as long as you want. Next page, just an overview. We're doing the 2 biannual studies of the 5 systems. We're doing 2 biannual experience studies, 2 biannual reviews, administrative reviews, and the 2 independent actuarial statements. The next slide is just a comment on reasonableness versus correct versus material. When you're going through the reports and we're looking at the actuarial audit, you'll see things that discuss things that might be reasonable, might be unreasonable, might be correct, might be incorrect. And we want to make sure that you understand the magnitude of what those mean. When something is unreasonable, it does imply that it's incorrect. But if it's reasonable, it doesn't necessarily imply that it's correct. Something can be incorrect and still be reasonable. You know, an example would be, of an incorrect thing would be, there were a couple instances in a couple small groups where the OA had intended to use one set of assumptions, new assumptions, but in fact didn't update the assumptions from the old set of assumptions. Well, the old set of assumptions might have still been reasonable, but it wasn't correct because it wasn't what the OA had intended to do. So we'll want to talk about that. And then the last thing is materiality. Neither the term unreasonable nor the term incorrect implies something is material. So when we actually go through the independent contribution audit, we test against pre-established tolerances that we established to determine materiality. None of the things that we found in the contribution audit rose to the level of materiality. Next slide. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the independent actuarial statement. That's one of the 4 reports that you have in front of you. And just the highlights here, our conclusion, we have certified that the systems are being funded in conformity with all applicable actuarial, financial, and legal requirements to the best of our knowledge. So we've gone through the process, we've looked at all the numbers, and we were able to reproduce them to a high degree of certainty. Next slide. Systems are funded in accordance with the standards of practice. The systems are funded in accordance with the applicable New York State and New York City statutes. And we believe that the funding objective will be achieved based on the OA's model, if the employers continue to contribute the contributions that the OA is calculating. And with that, we're going to go over to the administrative review, which is the next report.
And I'm going to speak from over here. I don't know if I need a mic for your purposes.
Yeah, if you could pull one of the
Sorry,
mics
sir.
closer to you, just so that you can be on the record. Thank you.
You bet. So this next section is some 30-some pages, and I guarantee it's going to go quickly. I could go through all of them. The administrative review is our evaluation of the data gathering and maintenance process used by the Office of the Actuary and by each system in the New York City retirement systems. We, as part of this, met face-to-face with staff on various occasions to discuss data collection, benefit calculation, and certification processes. And we also performed a walkthrough at each system to make sure that the security measures relative to sensitive member data was sound and that sort of stuff. The second engagement builds on the first engagement. We looked at the relevant items that were remaining from the first engagement. There are a number that have been completed, a number in process. We added a few items to our administrative review report, and that's kind of what this report does. So feel free at some point, I'll say, just keep leafing through. And we reviewed select individual member data as well from the June 30, 2012 actuarial evaluations as part of the process. This recommendation on page 16 is from the first engagement. There's no new recommendation, but we still are wondering if there's more efficient ways to approach this administrative review, especially given the numerous audits that all the systems go through. And we also have a recommendation to consider separating the contribution audits from the experience study. I'm going to use this page and then encourage you to slide through to page 43 at your leisure, because this is an example of the sort of recommendations we made in the second engagement. Here we say, let's provide educational presentations to system staff. That was appreciated by some systems, thought not necessary by others. The OA strongly said, what the heck, we've got enough to do already. We don't need to go around doing this. Maybe the executive directors could do that. And so the rest of this part of the presentation is really our recommendations, which feed on to the first engagement with some new ones. Generally, a good number of the recommendations have been completed. A lot are partially in process. Things were related to data are in process, continually evolving. And we also had a lot of items related to communication that were highlighted here. And we note that the communication generally is very good. It seems like the kickoff meetings that the OA has with the systems is serving everybody really well, but we offered some other things for consideration. So I'm going to leap all the way to 43, I think it is, but please look through these, and any questions, let us know.
See, I have an overarching question. When you come up with recommendations, who in the administration who is not involved in the actuarial event has responsibility or takes responsibility for seeing whether the judgments about implementing and not implementing are made?
That would be up to each individual retirement system. And so when you go through the reports, you'll see that there's a recommendation for the controller, a recommendation for the OA, a recommendation for each of the systems.
Right.
So each one of those entities would be responsible for
Now,
making that decision.
but there's no overarching authority then in the city that says you must do this even if you didn't otherwise want to at that individual level.
That is my understanding that that is correct.
There is not.
There is not.
There's not, they're separate boards, they're set up by separate state legislation, and they function independently, both on an administrative and an investment basis. And the boards have elected officials on them, as are the unions. So it is a difficult process to get conformity across
All
the
the
five
boards.
systems. And again, would repeat what I've said in the past. If it would be legislatively possible, that you should probably consider in combining some of the administrative functions. If you get any juice behind that, because you basically repeat the same administrative functions 5 times. While these were employees, they were paid by one payroll system. They were managed by one personnel system. Now that they're retirees, we have set up 5 separate systems with 5 different governing boards. But it's not within the purview of the controller or the mayor to change any of those things. It would be under the state
I
legislature.
rather expected that from you. So should we as an audit committee make a recommendation?
Yes.
So why don't we reserve that for the later conversation?
Yes.
Because that's one of the things that oozes out of here.
That's a good point.
Thank you for that point. I think the key is you're audited every couple years. Oh, yes, sir.
I was just going to say, when the previous actuary, Bob North, was hired, I was on the committee. Few of us were that hired him, and I remember I had words with other members of the committee. I felt that the actuary, in a sense, worked for the city, not so much because the salary was paid for by the city, but the fact that the city had to pony up all this money to the pension systems. And one of the gentlemen that I respected on the selection committee said, no, the actuary works for the systems. And I'm not sure that's right, but Bob North ran with that. And it was difficult, to get him to change. I do think the city is ponying up between $9 and $10 billion a year. That's a big number. The city doesn't play games. They may fight with the actuary, they may have discussions, but at the end of the day, they contribute. They don't delay, they don't make... Really, I was involved, so I know. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for it. And by the same token, I know it's a union town, but still, getting back to my colleague's comment, I think a little more thought should be given, maybe in the future, I may not be around then, as to, maybe they should listen a little more to the city who is paying all this money.
Well, Bernie, may I make a suggestion? We hear these guys out.
Okay,
and
I'm
then
sorry.
We as
Yeah.
a committee, I would be happy to go on record, if the rest of you are, as a committee, on this subject. I don't know what it'll mean, but it'll get it off my chest.
All right. You're at page 42, sir?
I am at page 42, going quickly to page 43.
Wait till we get there. Wait.
Ultimately, I'm going to 43. I was going to make the comment that,
You
it's
wanted
every...
to say something, sir?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Oh, just that, this administrative review is done every couple years, and so there are recommendations that we made that kind of pile on previous recommendations, and it's an evolving, continuous process. So we note there's been a bunch of activity with respect to all the recommendations, but, it's not the sort of thing that when we make these recommendations, it's heck or high water, you have to follow them. It's our recommendations from our audit. Ken, anything to add?
Yeah, it is a little out of scope for us to discuss the topic that you brought in. I do have some opinions on it, and I'd be happy to share them with you maybe after, so that we're not wasting
thank you, sir. I appreciate
time. But to stay on topic here.
So I'm going to close now. Our conclusion from the administrative review, we've concluded that the data used by the Office of the Actuary to determine the employer pension contributions was sufficient and accurate for those purposes, and with that, it ties right to Ken's contribution audit that he'll go into next, if there's no questions.
So we're kind of putting a process and a picture together here. We started with the administrative review, and we're going to move into the contribution audit. And again, I'm just going to go through a couple of these pages. You can go to the next slide. But the idea here is that we start with the administrative review because the valuations are only as good as the data under which they're based. So part of the administrative review, Jim he said it, but I just want to emphasize it. We actually took the data that we were given from the Office of the Actuary and went to each of the systems to verify that the data the Office of the Actuary used in their valuations was reflective of the data that the systems had on their files. We were able to verify that. We had a couple of recommendations here and there, but nothing material. So with that, we move into the contribution audit, where we're actually doing a full replication of the valuations. And in this engagement, it was the replication of the June 30th, 2012 actuarial valuation, which set the contribution for fiscal year 14. We reviewed the methods and assumptions, we did a replication, and we also looked at several test lives. Now, a test life is where we actually take somebody who represents one of the members of the system, and we look at the details of the calculations the OA performed with their software. We look at the details of the calculations that we performed with our software, and then we compare them and reconcile whether there are any differences. And from there, we had several recommendations that came out. The one thing we can say is we were able to replicate the OA's results within all of our established tolerances. And so you have a clean audit, basically. We did find some things. Go to the next slide. And our recommendations are, number one, you should be producing formal actuarial valuations for each of the retirement systems. Currently, it's only the police and the fire retirement systems that get a formal actuarial valuation. We would like to see all 5 systems have a formal report that anybody can pick up and point to and say, okay, this is what the actuary said, this is the assumptions they used, these are the results that they came up with. There's a process of levelizing the member contributions over the member's career. In each of the systems, members contribute at a certain level for a certain amount of time. Some of them they contribute for a different level, a second level for a certain amount of time, and in most of them they stop contributing after a period of years. The actuary levelizes that over the member's expected career. When we came last time, we mentioned that we reproduced the results with the exception of the accrued liability. We had a hard time reproducing the accrued liability. This was the reason. This wasn't disclosed in the materials that we received for the first engagement. We discovered it looking at the test cases. And so our recommendation, there's nothing wrong with doing this, but it should be disclosed. So our recommendation is to disclose it. We made a recommendation that you consider using a quarter around the market value. Our understanding is that the actuary is going to implement a corridor around the market value with fiscal year 16. Is that correct, John?
I'm not sure. Could you enhance what the quarter represents?
Yeah, I can. Can we slide back to that graph on the market value and the actuarial value?
Sliding.
All right. And actually, I want you to go a little bit back even farther. Keep going, right there. All right, just to give you a real quick primer. When you're doing evaluation, you're looking at all the records of all the members that are in the system, and you're trying to determine what their expected payments are going to be coming out in the future, based on what you're going to assume about when they're going to quit, when they're going to retire, if they're already retired, how long they're going to live. And so we bring all that back to the valuation date on a discounted value. We call that the present value of benefits. So that's the most important number that comes out of the valuation report. Everything else falls from that number. Okay? So that's our top box on there. After we create that present value of benefit, that estimate, we are going to split it into 2 pieces. What we think is going to accrue in the future, what we think is going to accrue in the past. Now, that doesn't necessarily line up with the way the benefits accrue on an individual basis. It's a cost method. We're actually allocating cost of the present value of future benefits to the future and the past, and that item that we call the normal cost, the cost that you're paying for any one year, is the piece that moves from the future to the past in the current year. So the accrued liability is what we refer to as the past service liability. The present value of future normal cost is everything in the future, and the normal cost is what's moving from the future to the past in the current year. After we do that, we want to look and see how well we've funded compared to where we think we should be. Well, that past service liability, that accrued liability, is basically a theoretical value of where you want your assets to be today, given everything you know today. We compare that to where the assets are today. The difference is the difference between where we want to be and where we're at. We call that the unfunded liability. So the contribution becomes the normal cost in any given year, plus an amortization on the unfunded liability, basically a financing on the unfunded liability. Well, in order to get to that unfunded liability, you have to have an asset value. Go back to the graphs. We do evaluation once every 365 days. We have a portfolio of invested assets. They're not liquid. We don't intend to liquefy them. So the question is, what value do they have? You have to assign a liquid value in order to do the measurement, but you're assigning it based on what we call the market value, or basically the market, which is the snapshot picture, not only once every 365 days, but on the last second of the market, on the last day of the valuation. So you're taking a theoretical value. You say, well, if we sold on that last second, this is what the value of our assets would be. Well, you've got billions and billions, tens of, I mean, one of the systems has $30 or $40 billion worth of assets. You couldn't sell everything within that last second of the market anyway. And even if you could, you would actually influence the price of the values. So that market value really is an academic value. And when you're making an academic measurement like that, one of the things you know is that the second before or the next day, the second after when it opens, it could be 5 or 10% higher or lower. And so we have a lot of volatility in the system by doing this measurement. So we employed this smoothing method. And so this green line is representing that volatility. The red line is representing the smoothing method. We want to factor out the volatility that we think is introduced by this process. What we don't want to factor out is a market correction, whether it's a market correction up or a market correction down. We never know with certainty how much of a change is market correction. So we put in another method. It says, okay, we're going to have this corridor. We're going to say that if the actuarial value of assets falls outside of this corridor, we're going to assume a market correction has occurred. And we're going to recognize the difference between where the actuarial value of assets came out to versus the limit on our corridor as market correction, and we're going to get that into the process right away so we can adjust the contributions right away and start contributing based on that correction.
Taking it out of the smoothing process.
We're taking it out of the smoothing process. So in other words, once you hit the corridor, whether it's on the upside or the downside, the next year, if the market goes in the same direction, you won't be smoothing anything. If the market goes in the opposite direction, you'll restart the smoothing.
How do you define the corridor?
Well, there are different opinions on that. A standard opinion is 20%, but I've seen them as low as 10%, as high as 30 or 40%. Most actuaries have different opinions on that. We recommended a 20% corridor. I don't remember, was it a 20% corridor that was adopted? It was.
So with the 20% corridor, if the market moves by 22%, you would
Pretty high corridor.
you would not smooth that. You would take the whole value immediately.
No, you would smooth a portion of that. Okay.
That's what I'm trying- how
And
do
then
you
it's
define
at 2%. It's at 2% above the corridor that you would recognize immediately. So you would bring it right to the corridor.
Within the 20%, we follow the standard smoothing practice.
Exactly.
Whatever falls above that 20%, I would recognize immediately and not phase it in over the 5 or 6 years.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Okay. All right. So we're good on that? Okay. Back to page 40, 44?
I think I'm better than I did before.
Yeah, and traditionally with corridors, if you look, of course, we have one history to look at, but if you look historically, it's very difficult, if almost impossible, to find a situation when the corridor was hit going up. When the markets were doing very well, even in the 90s, most funds did not hit the corridor of a 20% going up. But it does happen once a decade, on the downside. But traditionally, the 20% does reflect some of it, but you don't want to recognize all of it when you go down because a lot of that gets made up, with the rebound.
And the corridor itself is something that's been in actuarial practice for a considerable period of time.
Yes, it's very common. Yep. And I would say public pension, all private sectors plans, well, I guess under the old rules had to use corridors. Now the smoothing's so tight it doesn't really matter on the private sector. On the public sector, it's probably close to 50-50 on which ones that do use it and the ones that don't.
We're basically talking about what we would anticipate being a very abnormal situation.
Right.
It's not something that has happened with much frequency.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think in most of my cases, I've been working with cases since 1987. A lot of the same cases since 1987. I didn't hit the corridors until the 2008 downturn.
The modification to the one-year lag methodology, you
Yes.
feel the two-year lag would be improved with a one-year lag?
No. This is a technical modification. We're comfortable with using the one-year lag method. We don't have any problem with that. But the OA intended to produce a normal cost that was normal for each, level as a percent of each individual's pay, and we believe it's an increasing normal cost. We don't believe that they actually achieve what they intended to do. So while there's nothing wrong with the one-year lag method they're implementing,
Doesn't they use a 2-year lag? think you can,
Yeah,
people
let's-
use those terms interchangeably.
Right.
Okay, what we consider a 2-year lag is what you're referring to as a 1-year lag. Okay.
Yeah, yes.
So what you call 2 year, he calls 1 year, is that it? Am I crazy? No, it's,
No wonder
I'm
we
serious.
can't understand
What the technical term is 1-year lag methodology. Which is 1 year longer than normal.
1 year longer than normal, thank you, Bud.
Okay, thank you.
But it's 2 years because the valuation date precedes the fiscal year by 2 years. Prior to the 1 year lag methodology,
Yeah.
the valuation date preceded the fiscal year.
There was a strong
Let's go
operational
back in
reason.
history a little bit. There were many changes made to the pension funds as a result of the fiscal crisis that hit the city. Cost the city a lot of money. And one of the changes that was made was a 1 year lag methodology. Just a 1 year. In other words, for 14, you would use 2013 data. I think eventually legislation was passed to allow a 2 year because maybe it was too much data to deal with in a 1 year. But originally, it was a 1 year lag when all the changes were
The
made.
2 year went in place.
I'm sorry?
The 2 year lag went in place because the difficulty of the
Getting the data.
of the Office of Actuary turning the new contribution number
turning it around.
around.
No, I
What
understand.
was happening is that the final number would come just about the time we were doing the executive budget, and the number could shift by a couple $100 million, and it was exceedingly disruptive to the process. So the decision was so that we would have a valuation in time to build into the whole budget process, it was better to use the 2 year lag and get the information so that it could be built into the whole
And
financial
that's one of the
plan process.
complications if you have five systems.
This comment is different than that. It's much
No,
more
I
technical.
understand.
So that situation is very, very common across the public sector. We've seen lags from 1 to 3 years. I think CalPERS actually has a 3.5 year lag, if I recall correctly. It's very common. It's done for budgeting purposes.
Okay.
We have no problem with that. This is a technical implementation issue.
I got you.
So, and that's, we recommended some changes to the technical implementation of it.
Yeah, the math
for the OA
behind
to
how the OA is reflecting the
Yeah.
lag, not necessarily the lag itself.
Yeah, so we have no problem with the lag. The lag is fine. Keep it up.
And if you have 5 systems, it's going to be tougher.
Yeah,
I got you.
yeah,
I
yeah.
got you. And
Yeah,
it all fits together. Go ahead. sir.
Absolutely. And then there were some other recommendations that we made to the OA to look at some of the assumptions that we were using. This is just one of them that was consistent between all of the systems to look at how they were evaluating the future deferred members. Okay, so the next page is going to be on tolerances. I'm only going to go through 2 more pages for the audit, unless you guys want me to go through more. This page is on the tolerances. We established 2 tolerance tests. In order to pass our tests, you had to pass one or the other of the tolerances. Either the first one, the individual tolerance, 2% for the total present value of benefits, 5% for the liability by category, 5% for the normal cost, 5% for the computed contribution rate, or a materiality test that basically said whatever little line item we were looking at, it could have failed the first test, but if it was less than 0.5 of the total, we're still going to say it passed. We had no items that didn't pass one of those 2 tests. Okay? Next slide. And here is a summary of the results. Turn my slide too quickly. By system, and you can see the total present value and the employer contribution for each of the systems. Each one of them passed. Some of them were actually very, very close, less than 1%. If you look at the BRRS there, the present value of benefits was actually within 0.1%. The contributions were all within that 5% level. The present value of benefits were all within that 2% level. So it shows you we have a very clean audit. Now, we did identify some things for the OA to look at, some assumption changes that they intended to make that they didn't, some programming issues on the police side, but it was a very clean audit altogether. Any questions on the contribution audit? The rest of these slides actually go through the individual systems by systems, thinking we don't really need to go through that today, unless you'd like me to. And with that, I will turn it over to Joe to talk about the experience study.
Great, thanks, Ken. Yes, this is part of the engagement was for us to do an experience study.
What page are you on, sir?
We're on page 67, 68.
7.
You have a full report with tons and tons and tons of appendices with all kinds of data. A lot of that information is to transfer to the OA to use when they're coming up with their recommendations and their assumptions and verifications. What we want to do today is talk kind of a high level of some of the bigger recommendations and what kind of the outcomes were. If you remember this, we did an experience study at the midpoint of our engagement 2 years ago, and at that time it was mostly just working through the process. We didn't really make recommendations. We did give some previews of what to expect the next round, but this time we do have recommendations and suggestions. The entire process, what the OA produces, the valuations, what Ken just walked through, it's all built on a set of assumptions of the future. Some are very data-driven and technical in nature and behavior-driven, and it's going to be very difficult for past trends. It's very likely past trends will be consistent with the future. Other ones, though, for other assumptions, it's much more subjective, or there could be a pretty big deviation. Just because the last decade looked one way does not necessarily mean the next decade is going to look the same way. And so there's a blend of strict data review and analysis, and then how is that going to impact the future? What kind of changes could we see? And that's why we do experience studies on a regular basis, is to look at this information and see if we need to make any changes to the assumption. When you, especially say the discount rate, if you lower the discount rate, if we have an assumed investment return going forward and you bring that down, so you compare that to what return you just got the last 10 years. So when you get return that comes under, say, below your expectation, every year that goes into a loss, and that gets amortized over into future contribution requirements. You're going to have to make that up as you go. When you change the assumption, what you're doing would be just pre-recognizing a small sliver of future losses in that case. So if we lower that expectation, we're saying, okay, in the future we would build up some losses, so let's go ahead and recognize some of those now and get it in the contribution requirement. The goal of the entire valuation process, how would you measure success, would be if we get out 10 to 15 years from now, and as the contributions that are coming into these systems as a percentage of the city's budget equal to or less than what it is now. A non-success would be if contributions continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger as a percentage of the city's budget. That means the process needs to be reviewed. And so that's why we keep looking at the assumptions, try to set them in a way that the contributions as a percentage of the city's budget do not continue to have to go up. Or every time you do an experience study, you're going to have to continue just bump them up, bump them up. That's not, let's get a set of assumptions that we think has a good probability of that's not having to continue to do that. But based on our recommendations, the OA will actually consider and adopt these recommendations or their own for future valuations. We updated the results with the new data through 2011. That was in the first engagement. Now in the second engagement, we've included data through 2013. We further matured the database with status changes, and then we indicated our recommendations throughout the reports. In general, we find economic growth likely to continue to be suppressed compared to, say, long-term historical levels. That's especially true for the next 5 to 10 year period. Current inflation assumptions we felt were within a reasonable range, so we did not recommend a change there. Based on current investment policies, we are recommending that the OE consider lowering the investment return assumption prospectively. Retirees continue to live longer, and a recommendation we're making here is that the mortality assumptions be strengthened to assume people do live longer and that the rate of increase be reflected in the valuations more explicitly. And then lastly, the overtime assumptions need to be strengthened, and this is especially true right before retirement. So the previous assumption sets did have a difference between the amount of overtime expected to be worked by an individual during their whole career versus the last few years right before the retirement that gets into their benefit. What it shows is that difference should be bigger, that the amount of increase the individuals are able to accumulate has been larger historically or over the recent past than maybe the assumption suggested. Now again, this is one of those things where we either recommend it, either reflected in the assumption, or there needs to be some policy or some other way of bringing that back down. Otherwise, it will continue to cause losses and need to be reflected eventually. So today we're going to talk about the three big ones: investment return, the overtime, and the mortality change. And we'll briefly touch on a couple of the other smaller ones, but they're all in the report.
Can I ask a question about
Yes.
mortality?
Sure.
So I heard recently a study from whom I don't know, don't ask,
I could never hear her.
Mortality, the average age of Americans has actually, for the first time in generations, decreased due to high rates of obesity and higher rates of cancer. So are we not seeing that in our mortality rates because our retirees are healthier than most
Sure.
Americans? Is there a lag?
The direct answer is no, you don't see that in your data. So for one thing, when you read an article, someone talks about mortality, they're typically talking about mortality from birth. So they're saying, okay, we had this group of people born, how long are they going to live? What we're really focusing on now is someone that has made it to retirement, so they're already 60, 65, how long is that individual going to live? So that is, you could have a little bit of difference there. The other one is when you talk about national statistics, that includes people that look like your population. They have jobs, they do different things. And it also includes people that don't. So it includes people that don't have jobs or have part-time work or in the private sector where they're only on Social Security. And economic factors, health care, those kinds of things make a big impact to mortality. And so our analysis here is very specific to your population. And in fact, we split it up between the different groups. So your teachers, we have one set of assumptions, police and fire, general, because all these factors are a little different across those different populations.
So mortality is specific to our population,
right?
Not to mortality.
Right, and so a lot of the data we're going to show is specific to this data. Now, a lot of those factors, you can find very smart, very educated demographers to come in here and say, due to those things you just said, we will begin to go backwards. And there are some segments of the population that are beginning to go backwards. Non-educated females are going backwards. I mean, literally going backwards. However, others, you can find very smart people to come in here and argue we're going to be living to 150 within a generation as well. I mean, there's a pretty wide range. And I think for funding the benefits, somewhere in the middle is probably a better position. But for people with education, people that have high school degrees, and especially a lot of your population has college degrees and has a pension plan and has health care, those are all types of things that are going to prolong longevity.
So education is still measured.
It's your, it was what we talked
The main dividing line, if someone says educated to non-educated, will be high school degree to not. But
not have caught up with the population.
Yeah, right. But in every step along the way, it improves. So if you go to college and not college, you get another segment. If you go to master's degree or doctor, like a highly educated individual, you get another segment. So it's very correlated. But a lot of that could happen. I mean, obesity has got to factor in eventually. If you read the Social Security actuaries' analysis of all this stuff, basically what they believe is happening, and it seems to be in the data, is that we're still winding out smoking. We're still winding out, because today's 80-year-olds and 70-year-olds grew up in a time when smoking was very prevalent, and so we're still working that out, and the improvements we're getting from less smoking are being kind of offset by the obesity, and it's until the obesity catches it, which they're thinking could be in the 2040s.
So then I might actually get a Social Security check?
You might. Yeah, it could go the other way. Yes, hand out cigarettes. But I'll give you some data on that in just a second. Inflation, currently assumed 2.5% per year. In the middle there, you can see a lot of the ranges of things we looked at, investment firms, economists, Social Security's report, using the market. Most of the indicators are suggesting 2.5%, could be at the high end of the range, could be lower than that. However, here, the biggest thing impacted by this inflation assumption is the COLA, cost of living increase assumption in the valuations, which is tied to inflation. And so the riskier position would be to assume too low inflation at some level. So we think 2.5% is reasonable, and we would recommend not changing that. Next slide. Current assumption, investment return assumption is 7%. It's made up of the 2.5% inflation plus 4.5% real. It's net of all investment expenses. So it means after the returns have been achieved and we've paid out any fees that are associated with generating those returns, we'll still earn 7% over the intermediate to long term. The way we look at this is to try to get a basket of expectations, and we're currently we use 7 investment consulting firms that publish what their expectations are, and we fit that to the specific asset allocations of each individual system. And what you'll notice on the next slide, slide 76, between the 2014 results to 2015 results, these expectations did come down when you look at the whole portfolio, and it's driven heavily by the different expectations in the fixed income market, and even the hedge fund market did come down. So you take that 35 basis points difference in the fixed income market, a lot of these plans still have a large portion of their portfolio in fixed income, and you're a mature, all your systems are very mature, have high cash flow needs. That may be, I'm not saying that you don't need to be in fixed income. I'm just saying this is what's driving the lower expectations, is this fixed income item. So slide 77, I tried to just kind of give a big picture, mathematical example of what's happening here. The average fixed income allocation across the 5 plans is about a third. Right now, they're saying fixed income is going to be about a 3% return. So if a third of your portfolio is going to do 3%, to get back to 7, it suggests the other 2/3 has to do 9%. And so you start to see where if you're going to leave, if the portfolio continues to have that a third in fixed income, the math is going to become difficult, more and more difficult to stay at the 7%. So slide 78, allocation by plan. They are a little different across the different plans. They're not vastly different, but in fact, if you look between BRRRR, for example, and TRS right next to it, BRRRR has 7% less fixed income, and that's allocated up in the higher equity portions of the portfolio based on an expectation basis, because that's what we're working off of. We're working off these expectations of returns over time. That will produce a higher return expectation. Of course, in a given year, it may not produce a higher return in a given year. Also, there may be very good reasons that the teachers fund for liquidity needs and different things needs the higher fixed income. That's not my comment here. The comment here is that while we currently have the same investment return across all 5 plans, there could be a rationale for having a different one across the different plans. They don't necessarily all have to be exactly the same based on the risk tolerances and portfolios of the different plans. Next slide, slide 79. We did a 20-year analysis using the expectations from the investment firms, and this is the average of the averages, would be a way to, this is not one group's expectations or opinion. This is the average of the 7 funds, but they are still based on assumptions and expectations of the future. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But you can see here across the funds, the 50th percentile, kind of that one right in the middle, it's 7 or pretty much starts with a 6 for 4 of the 5 plans, and it's in that 680 range. Probability of achieving 7 over the next 20 years, right at 50, just a little bit below 50. If we did the same thing using the 5 to 10 year numbers that were provided by the different firms, all these numbers would come down. So the expectations over the short term are lower. And so based on that, and based on, so the probabilities not necessarily being in your favor, we're recommending the OA consider lowering this assumption another quarter. Of course, it doesn't have to go by quarters. You could lower it to 6.9, 6.8. But we're recommending the OA consider lowering this assumption to reflect these lower growth
John,
scenarios.
how long has the 7% been in effect?
Since fiscal year 12.
Fiscal year 12, which determined the
June 30th, 10 valuation for fiscal year
12, okay.
It was 8%.
So 12, 13, and 14 use 7. 15 use 7 also.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it was a drop from 8, right?
Yeah, it was a big drop.
Well, no, but,
Net of investment expenses.
right, yeah, there was a change in the way the investment expenses were changed, so it was not a 1% drop.
It really dropped from 8 to approximately 7.2.
Yeah.
Because we used to have the return gross of investment expenses and then reimburse the investment expenses through the contribution. Now the return is an average of 20 basis points. It's about 7.2.
Thank you, John.
Right. Yes, thank you. Okay, next slide, a little bit about the overtime. Currently, For NYSERS, police, and fire, the overtime worked by members during their career gets into their definition of pensionable earnings. And in all three cases, and this is very good, the OA already reflects the fact that there is a difference in the amount of overtime worked right before retirement. That's already built in. But pretty much across the board, you'll see the data suggests that even a bigger gap exists when people actually get to retirement. So here on slide 81, this is the 4-year period and a 10-year period. So the top line is the baseline overtime. Now, one thing to notice is that the actual overtime in general has been higher during this period of time. So that could be a human resource decision. Are we going to fill FTEs, or are we going to use overtime? But there could be a little bit bigger picture thing going on here as well.
Substantially uniform?
It's much more, this is fire specifically.
But I mean, the issue is substantially
But it's
uniform.
mostly fire and police, but NYSERS does have it as well,
But the police
heavily
department
towards.
had a chunk of it.
What's that?
I thought the police department had that particular problem.
Yeah, police as well. But fire has it too.
Yes.
And then some nicer groups.
Some NYSERS group, which primarily the uniform folks within
Probably,
the NYSERS group.
correct. But you can see the dual service overtime, so that's what that means is right before retirement, like the years that are getting into the retirement definition. You can see there's a 6 to 7% bump over the 4-year period, and if you use a 10-year period, almost a 10% bump difference. So we're recommending that this difference, this gap, be reflected in somewhat in the assumption set. And this is important because this almost goes one for one into the liabilities. If we have a set of data for your active employees and we think everybody gets a 5% bump, and now we change the assumption to be a 7% bump, you're going to get a 2% increase in your liabilities across the board immediately on the active portion. So it's a material assumption. 82. Now we're going to get into mortality. Our liability is very dependent on how long someone's going to live. There's really two pieces to this assumption. One is how long are people living right now, so the current data we're working with, and then how much improvement are we going to get in the future? And there are a few ways you can reflect future improvement, but we've made a recommendation, and the OA has already made a change to go to what's called a generational approach, and we 100% agree with the change that was made. And we'll kind of talk about that in just a second. 83, what's the process? Of course, it's very data-driven. We look specifically at your data, and not only just your data in total, but different groups of your data within the set. We're also going to take a little bit bigger picture, and life expectancies in New York are longer than most areas of the country to begin with, so we would have expected your outcomes to be in the same type of range, and they were. But we also look at it by age and try to get a good fit. Slide 84, how much improvement have we gotten? So let's just look at NYSERS females. The expected, so if we just took the experience study that happened 4 years ago and said, okay, projecting forward, what life expectancy would we have expected for a 65-year-old female in NYSERS to have gotten? It was 20.5. The observed was 21. So while it doesn't sound like a lot, in a 4-year period, that is a substantial amount of improvement compared to the expectation. And you can see pretty much across the board, look at TRS males, we expected 20, and we're getting closer to 21 and a half. So quite a bit of movement, a lot of improvement here, and that's why the industry actually issued new projection scales of projecting how much improvement we're going to get. And the one recently adopted by the OA is the most recent and the most current projection scales, but it does expect future improvement to go faster. We've also made some recommendations for new base tables, which is where our starting point. How long are people living right now? Most plans across the country just have to use a national table or use something that's been published by a large organization. Your data is so large, we can easily say it's fully credible and build a table based on your population. And so that's exactly what we've done. Slide 86. We have built assumptions in the report. You see the recommended Qs and the recommended life expectancies, and you can see they fit right on top of the observed data that we saw to very high statistical credibility. this is the starting point. Now you turn on improvement scales, and that's going to make the, and so it's so the point of this slide is that it's not just all at 65. We're looking at it at different age buckets to make sure we're fitting at different areas and we're not missing part of the projection. Slide 88, just fully generational. What this means is the step the OA has made is giving us a good probability we're not going to have to continue to make updates to mortality of material size in the future, because they're building in improvement and they're building it in so that it'll just continue to happen over time. So your current 65-year-old will have 1 life expectancy. Your current 30-year-old, when he's projected out to be 65, will already have a longer life expectancy built in. So the generational approach is you're having a different life expectancy for every group of people as they come through, and so that you shouldn't have this large update at the experience study like we're having in this experience study in the future. So the next experience study and the next one should not have, you're never guaranteed to not. I mean, if they cure cancer between now and then, you're going to have a big update. But in general, natural change and improvement in life expectancy should not see another big update. Again, you're taking a big bite now, and we'll show you the numbers in a minute. It's a big bite now. The idea is you shouldn't have to continue to revisit it. Slide 89 just kind of shows you visually. This was from another client of mine, but it's exactly what's happened here. This is the life expectancy of a 55-year-old retiree. This was for a public safety, so that's why we used 55. And you can see every time we got to experience study, we had to bump up the mortality. And then we get to another experience study, and had to bump up mortality. Get to another experience study, bump up mortality. By going generational, it just kind of builds it in so that we get this slow improvement over time and instead of a one-time increase. Let's go ahead to slide 91. So slide 91, some other observations. For fire, the actual incidence of disability, especially for WTC eligible members, has been higher than the current assumption. And so we've recommended an increase to that. However, the opposite has been true for police, that police disabilities have been lower than the assumptions were. Teachers have had higher incidence of all types of disabilities over the 10-year period. So we've made some recommendations there. For all groups, the actual rates of withdrawal have been higher than the current assumptions would have expected. And so we've made some recommendations there as well to be consistent with that. Consistent with national trends, people are putting off retirements. We think that will continue.
Can I stop you there for a moment?
Sure.
Because that's the one you didn't really develop a whole lot of stuff, and
Sure.
I have some interest about.
Okay.
One, what kind of impact did that seem to have on the actual contribution, the fact that people are deferring their retirement? On one hand, I would see that their benefit might be greater because they've accrued more benefit, but they're going to be paying it for a shorter period of time. So I was wondering how material that might be.
It's not, compared to these other items,
It's not material in this particular thing, but then my question would go over to the actuary. If we do change this, would that not impact our unfunded health insurance liability? Because our biggest part of our unfunded health insurance liability are those younger retirees. And if in fact the historical trend that they're coming up with the experience study is that people are delaying their retirement, then we should have to be paying those higher health insurance costs for a lower period of time.
Prior to the increase in retiree mortality.
But you've changed the mortality assumptions in the last plan. So you have the people living longer.
Right.
My question is, on the other side, them deferring their retirement, is that something that we're recognizing, and how much is that likely to be moving things?
We're not currently recognizing it. We have not changed the assumption of when somebody leaves active service and goes into retirement. So it has not been.
No, I know it hasn't. I'm just wondering, that's why I'm just trying to get an idea of how the magnitude of this particular deferral and what it might, as it matures and more fully develops in our database, what kind of impact it might have.
And if I could just add to that question, if you find that that is more or less pronounced in the uniform forces where we particularly have that issue, that would be helpful to know.
You particularly have retiree medical issues, what you're saying?
No, if we particularly are seeing later retirement
right.
in our uniform forces,
Yes.
that would actually have more impact on the medical
Correct.
than if we see in the
Because
civilian.
If it's a deferment of anybody anything preceding the age of 65.
Right.
Because prior to 65, we pick up the full health insurance load for those retirees. If our retirement practices tends to move people closer to 65 or past 65, it would tend to have a reduction on our unfunded liability for health insurance.
Correct. In the pension world, if you, let's say you were going to retire, so that's option one. And option two is I'm going to work one more year and then retire. Well, your benefit's bigger. So to the pension plan, that does have a positive impact, but it's not huge.
But
Retiree medical, that year never happens again. Like it doesn't, so you're right.
Since
this will have a much bigger
This experience study eventually works into the pension program, which eventually works into my unfunded liability, it may actually have a more material impact there than it does right here.
Correct. That piece will have a material impact there. Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so slide 92. The next few slides give an impact, illustrative impact, if all of these assumptions were made immediately, exactly as we stated them, and based on our model. So when the OA runs them, even if they ran the same assumption, it could be a little different, but I would expect the magnitude and direction to be similar. But of course, that remains that, and I've split out the investment return assumption on its own at the bottom because it wasn't, it's a little more subjective. It goes into lots of other items. For example, if there's changes to portfolios and investment strategies, maybe it would need to be revisited, whereas a lot of the top ones are much more explicit with the data. But you can see...
John, excuse me, didn't the mortality assumptions that they're showing, these estimated costs, wasn't that reflected in the addition in the January financial plan?
Yes, sir, it was.
So that's kind of been picked up.
Yes, sir, it has.
Not exactly, but okay, thank you.
Yes, the mortality change has already been done, so it's already in there. Yeah.
One of the important things to note on this page is that the way we built this page is that each line is assuming that the previous line had occurred. So when we look at the overtime assumption, we're assuming that the mortality had occurred.
I understand. No, that's a good point.
And those things are not, abstract. They affect each other. So if you can't cherry pick and just pick one of the items and not the other ones, you'll get different results.
John, isn't it true that if, at least it used to be, if you wanted to change the investment return assumption, you'd have to go to the state?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
You have to get state legislation. That's what I thought. What is the investment return assumption of the state, about 7.5?
New York State and local and New York Police and Fire, I believe, is 7.5, yes, sir.
7.5.
In their infinite wisdom, those people can
What?
control. In their infinite wisdom, the legislature can control the stock market.
Well,
you didn't know that?
Anyway, we broke out the overtime, and you can see the other ones. And so, for example, NICER's withdrawal assumption helped. The retirement assumptions helped in some degree. That's not true for all the different groups. But so you can see the impact on the unfunded, and you can see the impact on contributions.
in other words, I should take this one and throw away this one.
TRS, they don't have the overtime assumption impact. You can see a positive here due to the other pay-related and demographics. That's because, as we said, the disabilities for this group have been a little higher, and so you see that show up there. BRRS is a very small group, but very similar patterns as NICER's. Slide 6, police, the mortality, of course, overtime, pretty big hit.
All right.
Then other items, you can see the impact on dollar amount was not very different. The impact on the unfunded was larger. This was an odd statistical situation that's just shifting money from future accruals into the unfunded liability because the pay scales appear to have flattened out. For whatever reason, over time, based on the previous assumptions, was that pay increases for younger, lower service people would be a much higher percentage, and it would kind of come down over time. And if you look at the data more recently, it's flattened out a little bit. And so if you reflect that, what that does is it lowers your normal cost, but it ends up finding its way back into the unfunded for a current member, say that's already 15 or 20 years into his career. But you can see overall, it didn't really impact the employer contribution that much. Fire, here you can see the impact of the disabilities. So you can see the difference in mortality, difference in overtime, but also the impact of the WTC disabilities.
Changed to the minutes, and I don't remember where I put it on it.
That is,
Maybe it's in the
mine's,
bag.
that's the end.
Listen, I have to run,
No,
and I
sure.
have, I got all kinds of things. Is there somebody I could call to feed some,
Sure.
comments?
Yeah, I think we have to go through Tim on that, but yeah, absolutely.
You just send
Tim,
me-
you're the contact guy?
If you just send around an email with your coordinates, I would like to, I spend a lot of time on this, and I'd like to.
Jackie can accumulate those, for the committee and
I'm
send
sorry,
them.
dear, I didn't hear.
If you want, our office, Jackie, could receive the questions and put them together for Tim.
Okay,
Jackie is
I'd
always.
like to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
And I'll give you the typos, too.
Oh, good, thank you.
Oh, it's a very detailed presentation.
I must say, I read your one last year, the last one, I read this. The intellectual content in here was something that I had not recognized in dealing with the issue of actuaries. I really enjoyed, I hate to say, I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you.
I thought you were fixing to go the other way.
Pretty small minority there.
I admit that. My wife looked at some of it, and she was,
Do you have insomnia?
pardon me?
Do you have insomnia?
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or
No, thank you. It was a very thorough, very,
Thank
very
you.
thorough.
Thank you very much.
So the controller, there has to be a new actuarial audit, a bid for that, of developing the RFP and whatnot. Oh,
You know, I read the charter of the committee, and it says that we are responsible for picking the actuary as
Yes.
well as the auditor.
We do. They come to us with a recommendation.
at the advice of
Yeah.
staff on the controller's office.
Every
They're
single
our
time.
staff, Mark.
Every single time.
If I might, as I think I discussed with a couple people, there was an interesting news article in January about a consultant, the controller, had retained to look at the investments of the pension funds. I think it might be interesting if we shared that report with the committee, and we might want to consider whether that's something that we wanted to look into.
The report is actually up on the controller's website, and people have access to it. It's certainly worth at least reading the executive summary.
Maybe to make it known that it's out there and it's something that relates very much to this topic.
Okay, we could send a link out to the members if that's
And
what you'd like.
after that, it might be interesting to hear, what was coming out of that as far as changes and proposals and what have you.
Okay, we could certainly ask Scott Evans, who runs BAM, the Bureau of Asset Management, to come and talk about that at a subsequent meeting.
I have one other observation, and I must go. We meet in executive session with the auditors without
Yes.
management.
Yes,
Wouldn't it have been appropriate to meet with them without?
you may.
You could, you don't have the time.
I don't have the time. I don't ever remember.
It was a huge agenda.
No,
You-
well, I'm
I-
suggesting.
No, I
Bernie,
don't
it's-
think that's happened in the past.
It hadn't
I
happened in the
believe you're,
past.
I
just
believe you're
think
correct.
It's a good thing to do.
Right.
It was a huge agenda, and
We ought
you
to,
had a lot of
since
patience
we're
to.
charged with that, and we also hear an evaluation back the other way,
Yeah.
so that when we choose at the next one, we are more informed.
Okay. I think that's
Folks,
something we
isn't
can do
there
going forward.
a deputy controller for investments for the pension funds, or no?
There is a chief investment officer who also serves as the deputy controller who oversees the Bureau of Asset Management and the relationship with the pension systems.
But they couldn't be here today?
We did not invite him to be here. We invited Tim to be here because he was
I'm
involved in
just
this.
curious, because I
But
thought in the
with
past we
regard,
had him.
but with regard to the report that Mr. Larson is speaking about, we could definitely invite him. His name is Scott Evans, and we
he
could definitely
should have
invite
been
him to
here.
discuss the workings of BAM and changes that might be forthcoming based on the report.
I think it's very important. It's a very separate topic. Doesn't get into what the gentleman did today, but it's
Yes.
a very big impact on
It's
the.
also important to note David is here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes, David is here. And if you have questions about
I know
investments,
Mr.
he's
Jeter
definitely
is
here.
from the Bureau of
I
Asset-
apologize.
Thank
you,
And
Nicole.
it's very close to that. But I remember in the past, we had the chief investment officer here as well. All right, doesn't matter. All right, look, folks, we're slowly fading in the clinches as, what?
Need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I don't hear.
You need to take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting if this, okay, so moved.
So moved.
It's a long meeting. I thank you for your
Thank you.
patience.
Thank you.
If you'd like to talk afterwards about
No,
that.
just for a minute, yeah,
All right.
you have to,
Where are we
you're
having
gonna be
our
in.
conversation?
Yeah, we